Angela's Ashes, a memoir. I'm Frank McCourt. My father and mother should have stayed in New York where they met and married, and where I was born. Instead, they returned to Ireland when I was 4, my brother Malachy 3, the twins Oliver and Eugene barely 1, and my sister Margaret dead and gone. When I look back on my childhood, I wonder how I survived it all. It was, of course, a miserable childhood. The happy childhood is hardly worth your while. Worse than the ordinary miserable childhood is the miserable Irish childhood, and worse yet is the miserable Irish Catholic childhood. People everywhere brag and whimper about the woes of their early years, but nothing can compare with the Irish version. The poverty, the shiftless, loquacious, alcoholic father, the pious, defeated mother, moaning by the fire, pompous priests, bullying schoolmasters, the English, and the terrible things they did to us for 800 long years. Above all, we were wet. Out in the Atlantic Ocean, great sheets of rain gathered to drift slowly up the River Shannon and settle forever in Limerick. The rain dampened the city from the Feast of the Circumcision to New Year's Eve. It created a cacophony of hacking coughs, bronchial rattles, asthmatic wheezes, consumptive croaks. It turned noses into fountains, lungs into bacterial sponges. It provoked cures galore. To ease the catarrh, you boiled onions in milk blackened with pepper. For the congested passages, you made a paste of boiled flour and nettles, wrapped it in a rag, and slapped it, sizzling, on the chest. From October to April, the walls of Limerick glistened with the damp. Clothes never dried. Tweed and woolen coats housed living things, sometimes sprouted mysterious vegetations. In pubs, steam rose from damp bodies and garments to be inhaled with cigarette and pipe smoke, laced with the stale fumes of spilt stout and whiskey, and tinged with the odour of piss wafting in from the outdoor jakes, where many a man puked up his week's wages. The rain drove us into the church, our refuge, our strength, our only dry place. At Mass, benediction, novenas, we huddled in great damp clumps, dozing through priest drone, while steam rose again from our clothes to mingle with the sweetness of incense, flowers, and candles. Limerick gained a reputation for piety, but we knew it was only the rain. My father, Malachy McCourt, was born on a farm in Tuam, County Antrim. Like his father before, he grew up wild, in trouble with the English, or the Irish, or both. He fought with the old IRA, and for some desperate act, he wound up a fugitive with a price on his head. When I was a child, I would look at my father, the thinning hair, the collapsing teeth, and wonder why anyone would give money for a head like that. When I was 13, my father's mother told me a secret. As a wee lad, your poor father was dropped in his head. It was an accident. He was never the same after. And you must remember that people dropped in their heads can be a bit peculiar. Because of the price on the head he had been dropped on, he had to be spirited out of Ireland via cargo ship from Galway. In New York, with prohibition in full swing, he thought he had died and gone to hell for his sins. Then he discovered speakeasies, and he rejoiced. After wandering and drinking in America and England, he yearned for peace in his declining years. He returned to Belfast, which erupted all around him. He said, "A pox on all their houses," and chatted with the ladies of Andersontown. They tempted him with delicacies, but he waved them away and drank his tea. He no longer smoked or touched alcohol, so what was the use? It was time to go, and he died in the Royal Victoria Hospital. My mother, the former Angela Sheehan, grew up in a Limerick slum with her mother, 2 brothers, Thomas and Patrick, and a sister, Agnes. She never saw her father, who had run off to Australia weeks before her birth. After a night of drinking porter in the pubs of Limerick, he staggers down the lane singing his favourite song. Who threw the overalls in Mrs. Murphy's chowder? Nobody spoke, so he said it all the louder. It's a dirty Irish trick, and I can lick the mick. Who threw the overalls in Murphy's chowder? He's in great form altogether, and he thinks he'll play a while with little Patrick, 1 year old. Lovely little fella, loves his daddy. Laughs when daddy throws him up in the air. Upsy-daisy, little Paddy, upsy-daisy. Up in the air, in the dark, so that, oh Jesus, you miss the child on the way down, and poor little Patrick lands on his head, gurgles a bit, whimpers, goes quiet. Grandma heaves herself from the bed, heavy with the child in her belly. My mother. She's barely able to lift little Patrick from the floor. She moans a long moan over the child and turns on Grandpa. Get out of it! Out! If you stay here a minute longer, I'll take the hatchet to you, you drunken lunatic. By Jesus, I'll swing at the end of a rope for you. Get out! Grandpa stands his ground like a man. I have a right, he says, to stay in me own house. She runs at him, and he melts before this whirling dervish with a damaged child in her arms and a healthy one stirring inside. He stumbles from the house up the lane and doesn't stop till he reaches Melbourne, in Australia. Little Pat, my uncle, was never the same after. He grew up soft in the head, with a left leg that went one way, his body the other. He never learned to read or write, but God blessed him in another way. When he started to sell newspapers at the age of 8, he could count money better than the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself. No one knew why he was called Ab Sheehan, the abbot, but all Limerick loved him. My mother's troubles began the night she was born. There's my grandmother in the bed, heaving and gasping with the labour pains, praying to St. Jared Magella, patron saint of expectant mothers. There is Nurse O'Halloran, the midwife, all dressed up in her finery. It's New Year's Eve, and Mrs. O'Halloran is anxious for this child to be born so that she can rush off to the parties and celebrations. She tells my grandmother, "Will you push, will you? Push! Jesus, Mary, and Holy St. Joseph, if you don't hurry with this child, it won't be born till the new year, and what good is that to me with me new dress? Never mind, St. Jared Magella. What can a man do for a woman at a time like this, even if he is a saint? St. Jared Magella, my arse." My grandmother switches her prayers to St. Anne, patron saint of difficult labour. But the child won't come. Nurse O'Halloran tells my grandmother, "Pray to St. Jude, patron saint of desperate cases." "St. Jude, patron of desperate cases, help me, I'm desperate." She grunts and pushes, and the infant's head appears, only the head, my mother, and it's the stroke of midnight, the new year. Limerick City erupts with whistles, horns, sirens, brass bands, people calling and singing, "Happy New Year, should all acquaintance be forgot." And church bells all over ring out the Angelus, and Nurse O'Halloran weeps for the waste of a dress. That child's still in there, and me in me finery. "Will you come out, child, will you?" Grandma gives a great push, and the child is in the world. A lovely girl with black curly hair and sad blue eyes. "And Lord above," says Nurse O'Halloran, "this child is a time straddler, born with her head in the new year and her arse in the old. Or was it her head in the old year and her arse in the new? You'll have to write to the Pope, missus, to find out what year this child was born in, and I'll save this dress for next year." And the child was named Angela, for the Angelus which rang the midnight hour, the new year, the minute of her coming, and because she was a little angel anyway. Love her as in childhood, though feeble, old and grey, for you'll never miss a mother's love till she's buried beneath the clay. At the St. Vincent de Paul School, Angela learned to read, write and calculate, and by her 9th year, her schooling was done. She tried her hand at being a charwoman, a skivvy, a maid with a little white hat opening doors, but she could not manage the little curtsy that is required, and her mother said, "You don't have the knack of it. You're pure useless. Why don't you go to America, where there's room for all sorts of uselessness? I'll give you the fare." She arrived in New York just in time for the first Thanksgiving Day of the Great Depression. She met Malachi at a party given by Dan McAdory and his wife Minnie on Classen Avenue in Brooklyn. Malachi liked Angela, and she liked him. He had a hangdog look, which came from the 3 months he had just spent in jail for hijacking a truck. He and his friend John McErlane believed what they were told in the speakeasy, that the truck was packed to the roof with cases of canned pork and beans. Neither knew how to drive, and when the police saw the truck lurch and jerk along Myrtle Avenue, they pulled it over. The police searched the truck and wondered why anyone would hijack a truck containing not pork and beans, but cases of buttons. With Angela drawn to the hangdog look, and Malachi lonely after 3 months in jail, there was bound to be a knee trembler. A knee trembler is the act itself done up against a wall, man and woman up on their toes, straining so hard their knees tremble with the excitement that's in it. That knee trembler put Angela in an interesting condition, and of course, there was talk. Angela had cousins, the McNamara sisters, Delia and Philomena, married, respectively, to Jimmy Fortune of County Mayo and Tommy Flynn of Brooklyn itself. Delia and Philomena were large women, great-breasted and fierce. When they sailed along the sidewalks of Brooklyn, lesser creatures stepped aside, respect was shown. The sisters knew what was right, and they knew what was wrong, and any doubts could be resolved by the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church. They knew that Angela, unmarried, had no right to be in an interesting condition, and they would take steps. Steps they took. With Jimmy and Tommy in tow, they marched to the speakeasy on Atlantic Avenue, where Malachi could be found on Friday, payday, when he had a job. The man in the speak, Joey Cacciamani, did not want to admit the sisters, but Philomena told him that if he wanted to keep the nose on his face and that door on its hinges, he'd better open up, for they were there on God's business. Joey said, all right, you Irish Jesus, trouble. Malachi, at the far end of the bar, turned pale, gave the great-breasted ones a sickly smile, offered them a drink. They resisted the smile and spurned the offer. Delia said, we don't know what class of a tribe you come from in the north of Ireland. Philomena said, there's a suspicion you might have Presbyterians in your family, which would explain what you did to our cousin. Jimmy said, I know. 'Tisn't his fault if there's Presbyterians in his family. Delia said, you shut up. Tommy had to join in. What you did to that poor, unfortunate girl is a disgrace to the Irish race, and you should be ashamed of yourself. Och, I am, said Malachi, I am. Nobody asked you to talk, said Philomena. You've done enough damage with your blather, so shut your yap. And while your yap is shut, said Delia, we're here to see you do the right thing by our poor cousin, Angela Sheehan. Malachi said, och, indeed. The right thing is the right thing, and I'd be glad to buy you all a drink while we have this little talk. Take the drink, said Tommy, and shove it up your ass. Philomena said, our little cousin no sooner gets off the boat than you're at her. We have morals in Limerick, you know, morals. We're not like jackrabbits from Antrim, a place crawling with Presbyterians. Jimmy said, he don't look like a Presbyterian. You shut up, said Delia. Another thing we noticed, said Philomena. You have a very odd manner. Malachi smiled. I do. You do, says Delia. I think 'tis one of the first things we noticed about you, that odd manner, and it gives us a very uneasy feeling. 'Tis that sneaky little Presbyterian smile, said Philomena. Och, says Malachi, it's just the trouble I have with my teeth. Teeth or no teeth, odd manner or no odd manner, you're going to marry that girl, said Tommy. Up the middle aisle you're going. Och, said Malachi, I wasn't planning to get married, you know. There's no work, and I wouldn't be up to support. Marry is what you're going to be, said Delia. Up the middle aisle, said Jimmy. You shut up, said Delia. Malachi watched them leave. I'm in a desperate pickle, he told Joey Cacciamani. Bet your ass, said Joey. I see them babes coming at me, I'd jump in the Hudson River. Malachi considered the pickle he was in. He had a few dollars in his pocket from the last job, and he had an uncle in San Francisco or one of the other California sands. Wouldn't he be better off in California, far from the great-breasted McNamara sisters and their grim husbands? He would indeed, and he'd have a drop of the Irish to celebrate his decision and departure. Joey poured, and the drink nearly took the lining off Malachi's gullet. Irish, indeed. He told Joey it was a prohibition concoction from the devil's own still. Joey shrugged. I don't know nothing. I only pour. Still, it was better than nothing, and Malachi would have another, and one for yourself, Joey, and ask them two decent Italians what they'd like. And what are you talking about? Of course, I have the money to pay for it. He awoke on a bench in the Long Island Railroad Station, a cop rapping on his boots with a nightstick, his escape money gone, the McNamara sisters ready to eat him alive in Brooklyn. On the Feast of St. Joseph, a bitter day in March, 4 months after the knee trembler, Malachi married Angela, and in August the child was born. In November, Malachi got drunk and decided it was time to register the child's birth. He thought he might name the child Malachi after himself, but his North of Ireland accent and the alcoholic mumble confused the clerk so much he simply entered the name Male on the certificate. Not until late December did they take Male to St. Paul's Church to be baptized and name Francis after his father's father and the lovely Saint of Assisi. Angela wanted to give him a middle name, Muncha, after the patron saint of Limerick, but Malachi said over his dead body, no son of his would have a Limerick name. It's hard enough going through life with one name. Sticking on middle names was an atrocious American habit, and there was no need for a second name when you're christened after the man from Assisi. There was a delay the day of the baptism when the chosen godfather, John McCourt, got drunk at the speakeasy and forgot his responsibilities. Philomena told her husband, Tommy, he'd have to be godfather. Child's soul is in danger, she said. Tommy put his head down and grumbled. All right, I'll be godfather, but I'm not going to be responsible if he grows up like his father, causing trouble and going through life with the odd manner. For if he does, he can go to John McCourt at the speakeasy. The priest said, True for you, Tom, decent man that you are, fine man that never set foot inside a speakeasy. Malachi, fresh from the speakeasy himself, felt insulted and wanted to argue with the priest, one sacrilege on top of another. Take off that collar and we'll see who's the man. He had to be held back by the great-breasted ones and their husbands grim. Angela, new mother, agitated, forgot she was holding the child and let him slip into the baptismal font, a total immersion of the Protestant type. The altar boy, assisting the priest, plucked the infant from the font and restored him to Angela, who sobbed and clutched him, dripping, to her bosom. The priest laughed, said he'd never seen the likes, that the child was a regular little Baptist now and hardly needed a priest. This maddened Malachi again, and he wanted to jump at the priest for calling the child some class of a Protestant. The priest said, Quiet, man, you're in God's house. And when Malachi said, God's house, my arse, he was thrown out on Court Street because you can't say arse in God's house. After baptism, Philomena said she had tea and ham and cakes in her house around the corner. Malachi said, Tea? And she said, Yes, tea, or is it whiskey you want? He said tea was grand, but first he'd have to go and deal with John McCourt, who didn't have the decency to carry out his duties as godfather. Angela said, You're only looking for an excuse to run to the speakeasy. And he said, As God is my witness, the drink is the last thing on my mind. Angela started to cry. Your son's christening day and you have to go drinking? Delia told him he was a disgusting specimen, but what could you expect from the north of Ireland? Malachi looked from one to the other, shifted on his feet, pulled his cap down over his eyes, shoved his hands deep in his trouser pockets, said, Achai, the way they do in the far reaches of County Antrim, turned, hurried up Court Street to the speakeasy on Atlantic Avenue, where he was sure they'd ply him with free drink in honour of his son's baptism. At Philomena's house, the sisters and their husbands ate and drank while Angela sat in a corner nursing the baby and crying. Philomena stuffed her mouth with bread and ham and rumbled at Angela, That's what you get for being such a fool, hardly off the boat and you fall for that lunatic. You should have stayed single, put the child up for adoption, and you'd be a free woman today. Angela cried harder, and Delia took up the attack. Oh, stop it, Angela, stop it. You have nobody to blame but yourself for getting into trouble with a drunkard from the north. A man that doesn't even look like a Catholic, him with his odd manner. I'd say that Malachi has a streak of the Presbyterian in him right enough. You shut up, Jimmy. If I was you, said Philomena, I'd make sure there's no more children. He don't have a job, so he don't, and never will the way he drinks. So, no more children, Angela. Are you listening to me? I am, Philomena. A year later, another child was born. Angela called him Malachi, after his father, and gave him a middle name, Gerard, after his father's brother. The McNamara sister said Angela was nothing but a rabbit, and they wanted nothing to do with her till she came to her senses. Their husbands agreed. I'm in a playground on Classen Avenue in Brooklyn with my brother Malachi. He's 2, I'm 3. We're on the seesaw. Up, down, up, down. Malachi goes up, I get off. Malachi goes down. Seesaw hits the ground. He screams. His hand is on his mouth, and there's blood. Oh, God, blood is bad. My mother will kill me. And here she is, trying to run across the playground. Her big belly slows her. She says, What did you do? What did you do to the child? I don't know what to say. I don't know what I did. She pulls my ear. Go home. Go to bed. Bed? In the middle of the day? She pushes me toward the playground gate. Go. She picks up Malachi and waddles off. My father's friend, Mr. McAdory, is outside our building. He's standing at the edge of the sidewalk with his wife, Minnie, looking at a dog lying in the gutter. There's blood all around the dog's head. It's the colour of the blood from Malachi's mouth. Malachi has dog blood, and the dog has Malachi blood. I pull Mr. McAdory's hand. I tell him Malachi has blood like the dog. Oh, he does indeed, Francis. Cats have it too, and Eskimos, all the same blood. Minnie says, Stop that, Dan. Stop confusing the wee fella. She tells me the poor wee dog was hit by a car and he crawled all the way from the middle of the street before he died. Wanted to come home, the poor wee creature. Mr. McAdory says, "You better go home, Francis. I don't know what you did to your wee brother, but your mother took him off to the hospital. Go home, child." "Will Malachy die like the dog, Mr. McAdory?" Minnie says, "He bit his tongue. He won't die." "Why did the dog die?" "It was his time, Francis." The apartment is empty, and I wander between the two rooms, the bedroom and the kitchen. My father is out looking for a job, and my mother is at the hospital with Malachy. I wish I had something to eat, but there's nothing in the icebox but cabbage leaves floating around in the melted ice. My father said never eat anything floating in water for the rot that might be in it. I fall asleep on my parents' bed, and when my mother shakes me, it's nearly dark. "Your little brother is going to sleep a while. Nearly bit his tongue off. Stitches galore. Go into the other room." My father is in the kitchen sipping black tea from his big white enamel mug. He lifts me to his lap. "Dad, will you tell me the story about Cuchulainn? Say it after me, Cuchulainn. I'll tell you the story when you say the name right, Cuchulainn." I say it right, and he tells me the story of Cuchulainn, who had a different name when he was a boy, Setanta. He grew up in Ireland where Dad lived when he was a boy in County Antrim. Setanta had a stick and ball, and one day he hit the ball, and it went into the mouth of a big dog that belonged to Cuchulainn and choked him. Oh, Cuchulainn was angry, and he said, "What am I going to do now without my big dog to guard my house and my wife and my 10 small children, as well as numerous pigs, hens, sheep?" Setanta said, "I'm sorry. I'll guard your house with my stick and ball, and I'll change my name to Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cuchulainn." He did. He guarded the house and regions beyond and became a great hero, the Hound of Ulster itself. Dad said he was a greater hero than Hercules or Achilles that the Greeks were always bragging about, and he could take on King Arthur and all his knights in a fair fight, which of course you could never get with an Englishman anyway. That's my story. Dad can't tell that story to Malachy or any other children down the hall. He finishes the story and lets me sip his tea. It's bitter, but I'm happy there on his lap. For days, Malachy's tongue is swollen and he can hardly make a sound, never mind talk. But even if he could, no one is paying any attention to him because we have 2 new babies who were brought by an angel in the middle of the night. The neighbors say, "Ooh, they're lovely boys. Look at those big eyes." Malachy stands in the middle of the room, looking up at everyone, pointing to his tongue and saying, "Uck, uck." When the neighbors say, "Can't you see we're looking at your little brothers?" he cries till Dad pats him on the head. "Put in your tongue, son, and go out and play with Frankie. Go on." In the playground, I tell Malachy about the dog who died in the street because someone drove a ball into his mouth. Malachy shakes his head. "No, uck ball, can't uck kill dog." He cries because his tongue hurts and he can hardly talk, and it's terrible when you can't talk. He won't let me push him on the swing. He says, "You uck kill me uck on seesaw." He gets Freddie Leibowitz to push him, and he's happy, laughing when he swings to the sky. Freddie is big, he's 7, and I ask him to push me. He says, "No, you tried to kill your brother." I tried to get the swing going by myself, but all I can do is move it back and forth, and I'm angry because Freddie and Malachy are laughing at the way I can't swing. They're great pals now, Freddie 7, Malachy 2. They laugh every day, and Malachy's tongue gets better with all the laughing. When he laughs, you can see how white and small and pretty his teeth are, and you can see his eyes shine. He has blue eyes like my mother. He has golden hair and pink cheeks. I have brown eyes like Dad. I have black hair, and my cheeks are white in the mirror. My mother tells Mrs. Leibowitz down the hall that Malachy is the happiest child in the world. She tells Mrs. Leibowitz down the hall, "Frankie has the odd manner like his father." I wonder what the odd manner is, but I can't ask because I'm not supposed to be listening. I wish I could swing up into the sky, up into the clouds. I might be able to fly around the whole world and not hear my brothers Oliver and Eugene cry in the middle of the night anymore. My mother says they're always hungry. She cries in the middle of the night too. She says she's worn out nursing, feeding and changing, and 4 boys is too much for her. She wishes she had 1 little girl all for herself. She'd give anything for 1 little girl. I'm in the playground with Malachy. I'm 4. He's 3. He lets me push him on the swing because he's no good at swinging himself, and Freddie Leibowitz is in school. We have to stay in the playground because the twins are sleeping, and my mother says she's worn out. "Go out and play," she says, "and give me some rest." Dad is out looking for a job again, And sometimes he comes home with the smell of whiskey, singing all the songs about suffering Ireland. Mam gets angry and says Ireland can kiss her arse. He says that's nice language to be using in front of the children, and she says never mind the language, food on the table is what she wants, not suffering Ireland. She says it was a sad day Prohibition ended because Dad gets the drink going around to saloons, offering to sweep out the bars and lift barrels for a whiskey or a beer. Sometimes he brings home bits of the free lunch, rye bread, corned beef, pickles. He puts the food on the table and drinks tea himself. He says food is a shock to the system, and he doesn't know where we get our appetites. Mam says they get their appetites because they're starving half the time. When Dad gets a job, Mam is cheerful and she sings. When Dad brings home the first week's wages, Mam is delighted she can pay the lovely Italian man in the grocery shop. And she can hold her head up again because there's nothing worse in the world than to owe and be beholden to anyone. She cleans the kitchen, washes the mugs and plates, brushes crumbs and bits of food from the table, cleans out the icebox, and orders a fresh block of ice from another Italian. She buys toilet paper that we can take down the hall to the lavatory, and that, she says, is better than having the headlines from the Daily News blackening your arse. She boils water on the stove and spends a day at a great tin tub washing our shirts and socks, diapers for the twins, our 2 sheets, our 3 towels. She hangs everything out on the clothesline behind the apartment house, and we can watch the clothes dance in wind and sun. She says you wouldn't want the neighbours to know what you have in the way of a wash, but there's nothing like the sweetness of clothes dried by the sun. When Dad brings home the first week's wages on a Friday night, we know the weekend will be wonderful. On Saturday night, Mam will boil water on the stove and wash us in the great tin tub, and Dad will dry us. Malachy will turn around and show he's behind. Dad will pretend to be shocked and we'll all laugh. Mam will make hot cocoa and we'll be able to stay up, while Dad tells us a story out of his head. All we have to do is say a name, Mr. McAdory or Mr. Leibowitz down the hall, and Dad will have the 2 of them rowing up a river in Brazil, chased by Indians with green noses and puce shoulders. On nights like that, we can drift off to sleep knowing there will be a breakfast of eggs, fried tomatoes and fried bread, tea with lashings of sugar and milk, and later in the day, a big dinner of mashed potatoes, peas and ham, and a trifle Mam makes, layers of fruit and warm delicious custard on a cake soaked in sherry. When Dad brings home the first week's wages and the weather is fine, Mam takes us to the playground. She sits on a bench and talks to Minnie McAdory. She tells Minnie stories about characters in Limerick, and Minnie tells her about characters in Belfast. And they laugh because there are funny people in Ireland, north and south. Then they teach each other sad songs, and Malachy and I leave the swings and seesaws to sit with them on the bench and sing. A group of young soldiers one night in a camp were talking of sweethearts they had. All seemed so merry except one young lad, and he was downhearted and sad. Come and join us, said one of the boys, surely there's someone for you. But Ned shook his head, and proudly he said, I am in love with 2. Each like a mother to me, from neither of them shall I part. For one is my mother, God bless her and love her, the other is my sweetheart. Malachy and I sing that song, and Mam and Minnie laugh till they cry at the way Malachy takes a deep bow and holds his arms out to Mam at the end. Dan McAdory comes along on his way home from work and says Rudy Valley better start worrying about the competition. When we go home, Mam makes tea and bread and jam or mashed potatoes with butter and salt. Dad drinks the tea and eats nothing. Mam says, God above, how can you work all day and not eat? He says, the tea is enough. She says, you'll ruin your health, and he tells her again that food is a shock to the system. He drinks his tea and tells us stories and shows us letters and words in the Daily News, or he smokes a cigarette, stares at the wall, runs his tongue over his lips. When Dad's job goes into the 3rd week, he does not bring home the wages. On Friday night, we wait for him, and Mam gives us bread and tea. The darkness comes down and the lights come on along Classen Avenue. Other men with jobs are home already and having eggs for dinner because you can't have meat on a Friday. You can hear the families talking upstairs and down the hall, and Bing Crosby is singing on the radio, Brother, can you spare a dime? Malachy and I play with the twins. We know Mam won't sing Anyone Can See Why I Wanted Your Kiss. She sits at the table talking to herself. What am I going to do? Till it's late, and Dad rolls up the stairs singing Roddy McCauley. He pushes in the door and calls for us. Where are my troops? Where are my 4 warriors? Ma'am says, leave those boys alone. They're gone to bed half hungry because you have to fill your belly with whiskey. He comes to the bedroom door. Up, boys, up! A nickel for everyone who promises to die for Ireland. Deep in Canadian woods we met from one bright island flown. Great is the land we tread, but yet our hearts are with our own. Up, boys, up! Francis, Malachi, Oliver, Eugene, the Red Branch Knight, the Fenian Man, the IRA, up, up! Ma'am is at the kitchen table, shaking, her hair hanging damp, her face wet. Can't you leave them alone, she says. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, isn't it enough that you come home without a penny in your pocket, without making fools of the children on top of it? She comes to us. Go back to bed, she says. I want them up, he says. I want them ready for the day Ireland will be free from the Santa to the sea. Don't cross me, she says, for if you do, it'll be a sorry day in your mother's house. He pulls his cap down over his face and cries, my poor mother, poor Ireland, ach, what are we going to do? Ma'am says, you're pure stone mad. And she tells us again to go to bed. On the morning of the 4th Friday of Dad's job, Ma'am asks him if he'll be home tonight with his wages, or will he drink everything again? He looks at us and shakes his head at Ma'am as if to say, ach, you shouldn't talk like that in front of the children. Ma'am keeps at him. I'm asking you, are you coming home so that we can have a bit of supper? Or will it be midnight with no money in your pocket and you singing Kevin Barry and the rest of the sad songs? He puts on his cap, shoves his hands into his trouser pockets, sighs and looks up at the ceiling. I told you before I'll be home, he says. Later in the day, Ma'am dresses us. She puts the twins into the pram and off we go through the long streets of Brooklyn. Sometimes she lets Malachi sit in the pram when he's tired of trotting along beside her. She tells me I'm too big for the pram. I could tell her I have pains in my legs from trying to keep up with her, but she's not singing. And I know this is not the day to be talking about my pains. We come to a big gate where there's a man standing in a box with windows all around. Ma'am talks to the man. She wants to know if she can go inside to where the men are paid, and maybe they'll give her some of Dad's wages so he wouldn't spend it in the bars. The man shakes his head. Sorry, lady, but if we did that, we'd have half the wives in Brooklyn storming the place. A lot of men have the drinking problem, but there's nothing we can do long as they show up sober and do their work. We wait across the street. Ma'am lets me sit on the sidewalk with my back against the wall. She gives the twins their bottles of water and sugar, but Malachi and I have to wait till she gets money from Dad and we can go to the Italian for tea and bread and eggs. When the whistle blows at 5:30, men in caps and overalls swarm through the gates, their faces and hands black from the work. Ma'am tells us, watch carefully for Dad because she can hardly see across the street herself. Her eyes are that bad. There are dozens of men, then a few, then none. Ma'am is crying. Why couldn't you see him? Are you blind or what? She goes back to the man in the box. Are you sure there wouldn't be one man left inside? No, lady, he says. They're out. I don't know how he got past you. We go back through the long streets of Brooklyn. The twins hold up their bottles and cry for more water and sugar. Malachi says he's hungry, and Ma'am tells him, wait a little, we'll get money from Dad and we'll all have a nice supper. We'll go to the Italian and get eggs and make toast with the flames on the stove, and we'll have jam on it. Oh, we will, and we'll all be nice and warm. It's dark on Atlantic Avenue, and all the bars around the Long Island Railroad station are bright and noisy. We go from bar to bar looking for Dad. Ma'am leaves us outside with the pram while she goes in, or she sends me. There are crowds of noisy men and stale smells that remind me of Dad when he comes home with the smell of the whiskey on him. The man behind the bar says, Yeah, Sonny, what do you want? You're not supposed to be in here, you know. I'm looking for my father. Is my father here? Nah, Sonny, how'd I know that? Who's your father? His name is Malachi, and he sings Kevin Barry. Malarkey? No, Malachi. Malachi? And he sings Kevin Barry? He calls out to the men in the bar. Yous guys, yous know Guy Malachi what sings Kevin Barry? Men shake their heads. One says he knew a guy, Michael, sang Kevin Barry, but he died of the drink which he had because of his war wounds. The barman says, Geez, Pete, I didn't ask you to tell me the history of the world, did I? Nah, kid, we don't let people sing in here. It causes trouble, especially the Irish. Let them sing. Next, the fists are flying. Besides, I never heard a name like that, Malachi. Nah, kid, no Malachi here. The man called Pete holds his glass towards me. Here, kid, have a sip. But the barman says, What are you doing, Pete? Trying to get the kid drunk? Do that again, Pete, and I'll come out and break your ass. Ma'am tries all the bars around the station before she gives up. She leans against the wall and cries, Jesus, we still have to walk all the way to Classen Avenue, and I have 4 starving children. She sends me back into the bar where Pete offered me the sip to see if the barman would fill the twins' bottles with water and maybe a little sugar in each. The men in the bar think it's very funny that the barman should be filling baby bottles, but he's big and he tells them shut their lip. He tells me babies should be drinking milk, not water, and when I tell him Ma'am doesn't have the money, he empties the baby bottles and fills them with milk. He says, tell your ma'am, they need that for their teeth and bones. You drink water and sugar and all you get is rickets. Tell your ma'am. Ma'am is happy with the milk. She says she knows all about teeth and bones and rickets, but beggars can't be choosers. When we reach Classen Avenue, she goes straight to the Italian grocery shop. She tells the man her husband is late tonight, that he's probably working overtime. And would it be at all possible to get a few things and she'll be sure to see him tomorrow? The Italian says, Mrs., you always pay your bills sooner or later and you can have anything you like in the store. Oh, she says, I don't want much. Anything you like, Mrs., because I know you're an honest woman and you got a bunch of nice kids there. We have eggs and toast and jam, though we're so weary walking the long streets of Brooklyn, we can barely move our jaws to chew. The twins fall asleep after eating, and Ma'am lays them on the bed to change their diapers. She sends me down the hall to rinse the dirty diapers in the lavatory, so that they can be hung up to dry and used the next day. Malachi helps her wash the twins' bottoms, though he's ready to fall asleep himself. I crawl into bed with Malachi and the twins. I look out at Ma'am at the kitchen table, smoking a cigarette, drinking tea, and crying. I want to get up and tell her I'll be a man soon, and I'll get a job in the place with the big gate, and I'll come home every Friday night with money for eggs and toast and jam, and she can sing again, anyone can see why I wanted your kiss. The next week, Dad loses the job. He comes home that Friday night, throws his wages on the table and says to Ma'am, are you happy now? You hang around the gate complaining and accusing, and they sack me? They were looking for an excuse and you gave it to them? He takes a few dollars from his wages and goes out. He comes home late, roaring and singing. The twins cry, and Ma'am shushes them and cries a long time herself. We spend hours in the playground when the twins are sleeping, when Ma'am is tired, and when Dad comes home with the whiskey smell in him, roaring about Kevin Barry getting hanged on a Monday morning, or the Roddy McCauley song. Up the narrow street he stepped, smiling and proud and young. About the hemp rope on his neck, the golden ringlets clung. There's never a tear in the blue eyes, both glad and bright are they, as Roddy McCauley goes to die on the bridge of June today. When he sings, he marches round the table. Ma'am cries and the twins howl with her. She says, go out, Frankie, go out, Malachi. You shouldn't see your father like this. Stay in the playground. We don't mind going to the playground. We can play with the leaves piling up in the ground, and we can push each other on the swings, but then winter comes to Classen Avenue, and the swings are frozen and won't even move. Minnie McAdory says, God help these poor wee boys. They don't have a glove between them. That makes me laugh because I know Malachi and I have 4 hands between us and 1 glove would be silly. Malachi doesn't know what I'm laughing at. He won't know anything till he's 4, going on 5. Minnie brings us in and gives us tea and porridge with jam in it. Mr. McAdory sits in an armchair with their new baby, Maisie. He holds her bottle and sings, clap hands, till Daddy comes home, with buns in his pocket for Maisie alone. Clap hands, till Daddy comes home, for Daddy has money and Mammy has none. Malachi tries to sing that song, but I tell him, stop, it's Maisie's song. He starts to cry, and Minnie says, there, you can sing the song. That's a song for all the children. Mr. McAdory smiles at Malachi, and I wonder what kind of a world is it where anyone can sing anyone else's song? Minnie says, don't frown, Frankie. It makes your face dark, and God knows it's dark enough. Someday you'll have a little sister, and you can sing that song to her. Och, aye, you'll have a little sister, surely. Minnie is right, and Ma'am gets her wish. There's a new baby soon, a little girl, and they call her Margaret. We all love Margaret. She has black curly hair and blue eyes like Ma'am, and she waves her little hands and chirps like any little bird in the trees along Classen Avenue. Minnie says there was a holiday in heaven the day this child was made. Mrs. Leibowitz says the world never saw such eyes, such a smile, such happiness. She makes me dance, says Mrs. Leibowitz. When Dad comes home from looking for a job, he holds Margaret and sings to her. In the shady nook one moonlit night, a leprechaun I spied, with scarlet cap and coat of green, a cruiskin by his side. 'Twas tick-tock-tick, his hammer went upon the tiny shoe. Oh, I laughed to think he was caught at last, but the fairy was laughing too. He walks around the kitchen with her and talks to her. He tells her how lovely she is with her curly black hair and the blue eyes of her mother. He tells her he'll take her to Ireland and they'll walk the glens of Antrim and swim in Loch Ness. He'll get a job soon, so he will, and she'll have dresses of silk and shoes with silver buckles. The more Dad sings to Margaret, the less she cries, and as the days pass, she even begins to laugh. Mam says, "Look at him trying to dance with that child in his arms, him with his 2 left feet." She laughs, and we all laugh. The twins cried when they were small, and Dad and Mam would say "wish" and "hush" and feed them, and they go back to sleep. But when Margaret cries, there's a high, lonely feeling in the air, and Dad is out of bed in a second, holding her to him, doing a slow dance around the table, singing to her, making sounds like a mother. When he passes the window where the street light shines in, you can see tears on his cheeks, and that's strange because he never cries for anyone, unless he has the drink taken and he sings the Kevin Barry song and the Roddy McCauley song. Now he cries over Margaret, and he has no smell of drink in him. Mam tells Minnie McAdory, "He's in heaven over that child. He hasn't touched a drop since she was born. I should have had a little girl a long time ago." "Och, they're lovely, aren't they?" says Minnie. "The little boys are grand too, but you need a little girl for yourself." My mother laughs. "For myself? Lord above, if I didn't nurse her, I wouldn't be able to get near her the way he wants to be holding her day and night." Minnie says it's lovely all the same to see a man so charmed with his little girl, for isn't everyone charmed with her? Everyone. The twins are able to stand and walk, and they have accidents all the time. Their bottoms are sore because they're always wet and shitty. They put dirty things in their mouths, bits of paper, feathers, shoelaces, and they get sick. Mam says we're all driving her crazy. She dresses the twins, puts them in the pram, and Malachy and I take them to the playground. The cold weather is gone, and the trees have green leaves up and down Classen Avenue. We race the pram around the playground, and the twins laugh and make goo-goo sounds till they get hungry and start to cry. There are 2 bottles in the pram, filled with water and sugar, and that keeps them quiet for a while, till they're hungry again, and they cry so hard, I don't know what to do, because they're so small, and I wish I could give them all kinds of food so that they'd laugh and make the baby sounds. They love the mushy food Mam makes in a pot, bread, mashed up in milk and water and sugar. Mam calls it bread and goody. If I take the twins home now, Mam will yell at me for giving her no rest or for waking Margaret. We have to stay in the playground till she sticks her head out the window and calls for us. I make funny faces for the twins to stop their crying. I put a piece of paper on my head and let it fall, and they laugh and laugh. I push the pram over to Malachy playing on the swings with Freddie Leibowitz. Malachy is trying to tell Freddie all about the way Setanta became Cahulan. I tell him stop telling that story. It's my story. He won't stop. I push him and he cries, "Wah, wah, I'll tell Mam." Freddie pushes me and everything turns dark in my head, and I run at him with fists and knees and feet till he yells, "Hey, stop, stop." And I won't, because I can't. I don't know how. And if I stop, Malachy will go on taking my story from me. Freddie pushes me away and runs off yelling, "Frankie tried to kill me! Frankie tried to kill me!" I don't know what to do because I never tried to kill anyone before, and now Malachy on the swing cries, "Don't kill me, Frankie!" And he looks so helpless, I put my arms around him and help him off the swing. He hugs me. "I won't tell you a story anymore. I won't tell Freddie about Coo. I want to laugh, but I can't because the twins are crying in the pram and it's dark in the playground. And what's the use of trying to make funny faces and letting things fall off your head when they can't see you in the dark? The Italian grocery shop is across the street, and I see bananas, apples, oranges. I know the twins can eat bananas. Malachy loves bananas, and I like them myself. But you need money. Italians are not known for giving away bananas, especially to the McCourts who owe them money already for groceries. My mother tells me all the time, never, never leave that playground except to come home. But what am I to do with the twins bawling with the hunger in the pram? I tell Malachy, I'll be back in a minute. I make sure no one is looking, grab a bunch of bananas outside the Italian grocery shop and run down Myrtle Avenue, away from the playground, around the block, and back to the other end where there's a hole in the fence. We push the pram to a dark corner and peel the bananas for the twins. There are 5 bananas in the bunch, and we feast on them in the dark corner. The twins slobber and chew and spread banana all over their faces, their hair, their clothes. I realize then The questions will be asked. Ma'am will want to know why the twins are smothered in bananas. Where did you get them? I can't tell her about the Italian shop in the corner. I will have to say, a man. That's what I'll say. A man. Then the strange thing happens. There's a man at the gate of the playground. He's calling to me. Oh, God, it's the Italian. Hey, Sonny, come here, talking to you, come here. I go to him. You the kid with the little brothers, right? Twins? Yes, sir. Here. Got a bag of fruit. I don't give it to you, I throw it out, right? So, here, take the bag. You got apples, oranges, bananas. You like bananas, right? I think you like bananas, huh? Uh-huh. I know you like the bananas. Here, take the bag. You got a nice mother there. Your father, well, you know, he's got the Irish problem, the Irish thing. Give them twins a banana. Shut 'em up. I hear 'em all the way across the street. Thank you, sir. Geez, polite kid, eh? Where'd you learn that? My father told me to say thanks, sir. Your father? Oh well. Dad sits at the table reading the paper. He says that President Roosevelt is a good man, and everyone in America will soon have a job. Ma'am is on the other side of the table feeding Margaret with a bottle. She has the hard look that frightens me. Where did you get that fruit? The man. What man? The Italian man gave it to me. Did you steal that fruit? Maliki says, The man gave Frankie the bag. And what did you do to Freddie Leibowitz? His mother was here. Lovely woman. I don't know what we do without her, and Minnie McAdory. And you had to attack poor Freddie? Maliki jumps up and down. He didn't try to kill Freddie. Didn't try to kill me. Dad says, Wished, Maliki, wished. Come over here. And he takes Maliki on his lap. My mother says, Go down the hall and tell Freddie you're sorry. But Dad says, Do you want to tell Freddie you're sorry? I don't. My parents look at one another. Dad says, Freddie is a good boy. He was only pushing your little brother in the swing, isn't that right? He was trying to steal my Cohulan story. Ach, now, Freddie doesn't care about the Cohulan story. He has his own story. Hundreds of stories. He's Jewish. What's Jewish? Dad laughs. Jewish is people with their own stories. They don't need Cohulan. They have Moses. They have Samson. What's Samson? If you go down and talk to Freddie, I'll tell you about Samson later. You can tell Freddie you're sorry, and you'll never do it again, and you can even ask him about Samson. Anything you like, as long as you talk to Freddie, will you? The baby gives a little cry in my mother's arms, and Dad jumps up, dropping Maliki to the floor. Is she all right? My mother says, Of course she's all right. She's feeding. God above, you're a bundle of nerves. They're talking about Margaret now, and I'm forgotten. I don't care. I'm going down the hall to ask Freddie about Samson, to see if Samson is as good as Cohulan, to see if Freddie has his own story, or if he still wants to steal Cohulan. Maliki wants to go with me now that my father is standing and doesn't have a lap anymore. Mrs. Leibowitz says, Oh, Frankie, come in. And little Maliki, and tell me, Frankie, what did you do to Freddie? Tried to kill him? Freddie's a good boy, Frankie. Reads his book, listens to radio with his papa. He swinks your brother and swink, and you tried to kill him? Oh, Frankie, and your poor mother and her sick baby. She's not sick, Mrs. Leibowitz. Sick she is. That is one sick baby. I know from sick babies. I work in hospital. Don't tell me, Frankie. Come in. Freddie, Frankie is here. Come out. Frankie won't kill you no more. You and little Maliki. Nice Jewish name. Have piece cake, huh? Why'd they give you a Jewish name, huh? So, glass milk, piece cake. You boys so thin. Irish don't eat. We sit at the table with Freddie, eating cake, drinking milk. Mr. Leibowitz sits in an armchair reading the paper, listening to the radio. Sometimes he speaks to Mrs. Leibowitz, and I don't understand because strange sounds come from his mouth. Freddie understands. When Mr. Leibowitz makes the strange sounds, Freddie gets up and takes him a piece of cake. Mr. Leibowitz smiles at Freddie and pats his head, and Freddie smiles back and makes the strange sounds. Mrs. Leibowitz shakes her head at Maliki and me. Oi, so thin. She says oi so much, Maliki laughs and says oi, and the Leibowitzes laugh, and Mr. Leibowitz says words we can understand. When Irish eyes are smiling. Mrs. Leibowitz laughs so hard her body shakes, and she holds her stomach, and Maliki says oi again, because he knows that makes everyone laugh. I say oi, but no one laughs, and I know oi belongs to Maliki, the way Cohulan belongs to me, and Maliki can have his oi. Mrs. Leibowitz, my father said Freddie has a favourite story. Maliki says, Sam, oi. Everyone laughs again, but I don't because I can't remember what comes after Sam. Freddie mumbles through his cake, Samson, and Mrs. Leibowitz tells him, "Don't talk with your mouth full." And I laugh because she's grown up and she says mouse instead of mouth. Maliki laughs because I laugh, and the Leibowitzes look at each other and smile. Freddie says, "Not Samson. My favorite story is David and the giant, Goliath. David killed him dead with a slingshot, a stone in his head. His brains was on the ground." "Where on the ground?" says Mr. Leibowitz. "Yes, Papa." Papa. That's what Freddie calls his father, and Dad is what I call my father. My mother's whisper wakes me. "What's up with the child?" It's still early, and there isn't much morning in the room, but you can see Dad over by the window with Margaret in his arms. He's rocking her and sighing, "Ach." Mam says, Is she? Is she sick?" "Ach, she's very quiet, and she's a wee bit cold." My mother is out of the bed, taking the child. "Go for the doctor, go for God's sake." And my father is pulling on his trousers over his shirt. No jacket, shoes, no socks on this bitter day. We wait in the room, the twins asleep at the bottom of the bed, Maliki stirring beside me. "Frankie, I want a drink of water." Mam rocks in her bed with the baby in her arms. "Oh, Margaret, Margaret, my own little love, open your lovely blue eyes, my little Lanav." I fill a cup of water for Maliki and me, and my mother wails, "Water for you and your brother. Oh, indeed, water is it? And nothing for your sister, your poor little sister. Did you ask if she had a mouth in her head? Did you ask if she'd like a drop of water? Oh, no. Go on and drink your water, you and your brother, as if nothing happened. A regular day for the two of you, isn't it?" And the twins sleeping away as if they didn't have a care, and their poor little sister sick here in my arms, sick in my arms. Oh, sweet Jesus in heaven. Why is she talking like this? She's not talking like my mother today. I want my father. Where is my father? I get back into bed and start to cry. Maliki says, "Why you cry? Why you cry?" Till Mam is at me again. "Your sister is sick in my arms, and you're there whining and whinging. If I go over to that bed, I'll give you something to whinge about." Dad is back with the doctor. Dad has the whiskey smell. The doctor examines the baby, prods her, raises her eyelids, feels her neck, arms, legs. He straightens up and shakes his head. She's gone. Mam reaches for the baby, hugs her, turns to the wall. The doctor wants to know, was there any kind of accident? Did anyone drop the baby? Did the boys play too hard with her? Anything? My father shakes his head. Doctor says he'll have to take her to examine her, and Dad signs a paper. My mother begs for another few minutes with her baby, but the doctor says he doesn't have all day. When Dad reaches for Margaret, my mother pulls away against the wall. She has the wild look. Her black curly hair is damp in her forehead, and there's sweat all over her face. Her eyes are wide open, and her face is shiny with tears. She keeps shaking her head and moaning, "I know," till Dad eases the baby from her arms. The doctor wraps Margaret completely in a blanket, and my mother cries, "Oh, Jesus, you'll smother her. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, help me." The doctor leaves. My mother turns to the wall and doesn't make a move or sound. The twins are awake, crying with the hunger, but Dad stands in the middle of the room staring at the ceiling. His face is white and he beats on his thighs with his fists. He comes to the bed, puts his hand in my head. His hand is shaking. "Francis, I'm going out for cigarettes." Mam stays in the bed all day, hardly moving. Maliki and I fill the twins' bottles with water and sugar. In the kitchen we find a half loaf of stale bread and 2 cold sausages. We can't have tea because the milk is sour in the icebox where the ice is melted again. And everyone knows you can't drink tea without milk unless your father gives it to you out of his mug while he's telling you about Cahulan. The twins are hungry again, but I know I can't give them water and sugar all day and night. I boil sour milk in a pot, mash in some of the stale bread, and try to feed them from a cup, bread and goody. They make faces and run to Mam's bed, crying. She keeps her face to the wall, and they run back to me, still crying. They won't eat the bread and goody till I kill the taste of the sour milk with sugar. Now they eat and smile and rub the goody over their faces. Maliki wants some, and if he can eat it, so can I. We all sit on the floor eating the goody and chewing on the cold sausage and drinking water my mother keeps in a milk bottle in the icebox. After we eat and drink, we have to go to the lavatory down the hall, but we can't get in because Mrs. Leibowitz is inside humming and singing. She says, "Wait, children, wait, darlings. Won't be 2 seconds." Maliki claps his hands and dances around singing, "Wait, children, wait, darlings." Mrs. Leibowitz opens the lavatory door. Look at him, little actor already. "So, children, how's your mother?" She's in bed, Mrs. Leibowitz. The doctor took Margaret and my father went for cigarettes. Oh, Frankie, Frankie, I said that was one sick child. Malachi is clutching himself. Have to pee, have to pee. So pee already? You boys pee and we see your mother. After we pee, Mrs. Leibowitz comes to see Ma'am. Oh, Mrs. McCourt, oy vey, darling, look at this. Look at these twins, naked. Mrs. McCourt, what is matter, eh? The baby, she's sick, so talk to me. Poor woman. Here, turn around, Mrs. Talk to me. Aye, this is one mess. Talk to me, Mrs. McCourt. She helps my mother sit up against the wall. Ma'am seems smaller. Mrs. Leibowitz says she'll bring some soup and tells me get some water to wash my mother's face. I dip a towel in cold water and pat her forehead. She presses my hand against her cheeks. Oh, Jesus, Frankie. Oh, Jesus. She won't let my hand go, and I'm frightened because I've never seen her like this before. She's saying Frankie only because it's my hand she's holding, and it's Margaret she's thinking about, not me. Your lovely little sister is dead, Frankie. Dead. Oh, where's your father? She lets my hand drop. I said, where's your father? Drinking. That's where he is. There isn't a penny in the house. He can't get a job, but he finds money for the drink, money for the drink, money for the drink, money for the drink. She rears back, knocks her head on the wall and screams, where is she? Where is she? Where's my little girl? Oh, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, help me this night. I'll go mad, so I will. I'll go pure mad. Mrs. Leibowitz rushes in. Mrs., what is it? The little girl, where is she? My mother screams again. Dead, Mrs. Leibowitz, dead. Her head drops and she rocks back and forth. Middle of the night, Mrs. Leibowitz, in her pram. I should have been watching her. 7 weeks she had in this world and died in the middle of the night, alone, Mrs. Leibowitz, all alone in that pram. Mrs. Leibowitz holds my mother in her arms. Shush now, shush. Babies go like that. It happens, Mrs. God takes them. In the pram, Mrs. Leibowitz, near my bed. I could have picked her up, but she didn't have to die, did she? God doesn't want little babies. What is God going to do with little babies? I don't know, Mrs. I don't know from God. Have soup. Good soup. Make you strong. You boys. Get bowls. I give you soup. What's bowls, Mrs. Leibowitz? Oh, Frankie, you don't know bowl for the soup, darling. You don't have a bowl, so get cups for the soup. I mix pea soup and lentil soup. No ham. Irish like the ham. No ham, Frankie. Drink, Mrs. Drink your soup. She spoons the soup into my mother's mouth, wipes the dribble from her chin. Malachi and I sit on the floor drinking from mugs. We spoon the soup into the twins' mouths. It is lovely and hot and tasty. My mother never makes soup like this, and I wonder if there's any chance Mrs. Leibowitz could ever be my mother. Freddie could be me and have my mother and my father too, and he could have Malachi and the twins for brothers. He can't have Margaret anymore because she's like the dog in the street that was taken away. I don't know why she was taken away. My mother says she died in her pram, and that must be like getting hit by a car because they take you away. I wish little Margaret could be here for the soup. I could give it to her with a spoon, the way Mrs. Leibowitz is giving it to my mother, and she'd gurgle and laugh the way she did with Dad. She wouldn't cry anymore, and my mother wouldn't be in the bed day and night, and Dad would be telling me Cahoolan stories, and I wouldn't want Mrs. Leibowitz to be my mother anymore. Mrs. Leibowitz is nice, but I'd rather have my father telling me Cahoolan stories and Margaret chirping and Mam laughing when Dad dances with 2 left feet. Minnie McAdory comes in to help. Mother of God, Mrs. Leibowitz, these twins smell to the high heavens. I don't know about Mother of God, Minnie, but these twins need a wash. They need clean diapers. Frankie, where are the clean diapers? I don't know. Minnie says, they're just wearing rags for diapers. I'll get some Amazes. Frankie, you take off those rags and throw them out. Malachi removes Oliver's rag, and I struggle with Eugene. The safety pin is stuck, and when he wriggles, it comes loose, sticks him in the hip, and starts him screaming for Mam. But Minnie is back with a towel and soap and hot water. I help her wash away the cake shit, and she lets me shake talcum powder on the twins' raw, sore skin. She says they're good little boys, and she has a big surprise for them. She goes down the hall and brings back a pot of mashed potatoes for all of us. There's plenty of salt and butter in the potatoes, and I wonder if there's any chance Minnie could be my mother so that I could eat like this all the time. If I could have Mrs. Leibowitz and Minnie for mothers at the same time, I'd have no end of soup and mashed potatoes. Minnie and Mrs. Leibowitz sit at the table. Mrs. Leibowitz says something has to be done. These children are running wild, and where is the father? I hear Minnie whisper he's out for the drink. Mrs. Leibowitz says, terrible, terrible, the way the Irish drink. Minnie says her Dan doesn't drink. never touches the stuff. And Dan told her that when the baby died, that poor man, Malachy McCourt, went mad all over Flatbush Avenue and Atlantic Avenue, that he was thrown out of all the bars around the Long Island Railroad station, that the cops would have thrown him in jail if it was anything else but the death of that lovely little baby. Here he has 4 lovely little boys, says Minnie, but it's no comfort to him. That little girl brought out something in him. You know, he didn't even drink after she was born, and that was a miracle. Mrs. Leibowitz wants to know where Mam's cousins are, the big women with the quiet husbands. Minnie will find them and tell them the children are neglected, running wild, sore arses and everything. 2 days later, Dad returns from his cigarette hunt. It's the middle of the night, but he gets Malachy and me out of the bed. He has the smell of the drink on him. He has us stand at attention in the kitchen. We're soldiers. He tells us we must promise to die for Ireland. We will, Dad, we will. All together, we sing Kevin Barry. On Mount Joy one Monday morning, high upon the gallows tree, Kevin Barry gave his young life for the cause of liberty. Just a lad of 18 summers, sure there's no one can deny, as he marched to death that morning, how he held his head on high. There's a knock at the door. Mr. McAdory. Och, Malachy, for God's sake, it's 3 in the morning. I have the whole house woke with the singing. Och, Dan, I'm only teaching the boys to die for Ireland. You could teach them to die for Ireland in the daytime, Malachy. 'Tis urgent, Dan, 'tis urgent. I know, Malachy, but they're only children. Babies. You go to bed now like a decent man. Bed, Dan, what am I to do in bed? Her little face is there day and night, her curly black hair and her lovely blue eyes. Oh, Jesus, Dan, what will I do? Was it the hunger that killed her, Dan? Of course not. Your missus was nursing her. God took her. He has his reasons. One more song, Dan, before we go to bed. Good night, Malachy. Come on, boys, sing. Because he loved the motherland, because he loved the green, he goes to meet a martyr's fate with proud and joyous mien. True to the last, oh, true to the last, he treads the upward way. Young Roddy Macaulay goes to die on the bridge at Tuam today. You'll die for Ireland, won't you, boys? We will, Dad. And we'll all meet your little sister in heaven, won't we, boys? We will, Dad. My brother is standing with his face pressed against the leg of the table, and he's asleep. Dad lifts him, staggers across the room, places him in the bed by my mother. I climb into bed, and my father, still in his clothes, lies beside me. I'm hoping he'll put his arms around me, but he goes on singing about Roddy Macaulay and talking to Margaret. Oh, my little curly-haired, blue-eyed love, I would dress you in silks and take you to Lough Neagh. Till day is at the window, and I fall asleep. That night, Cahulan comes to me. There's a big green bird on his shoulder that keeps singing about Kevin Barry and Roddy Macaulay. And I don't like that bird because there's blood dripping from his mouth when he sings. In one hand, Cahulan carries the gay bolga, the spear that is so mighty only he can throw it. In the other hand, he carries a banana, which he keeps offering to the bird, who just squawks and spits blood at him. You'd wonder why Cahulan puts up with a bird like that. If the twins ever spat blood at me when I offered them a banana, I think I'd hit them on the head with it. In the morning, my father is at the kitchen table, and I tell him my dream. He says there were no bananas in Ireland in the old times, and even if there were, Cahulan would never offer one to that bird, because that was the one that came over from England for the summer and perched on his shoulder when he was dying and propped up against a stone. And when the men of Erin, which is Ireland, wanted to kill him, they were afraid till they saw the bird drinking Cahulan's blood, and then they knew it was safe to attack him, the dirty, bloody cowards. So, you have to be wary of birds, Francis, birds and Englishmen. Most of the day, Mam lies in bed with her face to the wall. If she drinks tea or eats anything, she throws up in the bucket under the bed, and I have to empty it and rinse it in the lavatory down the hall. Mrs. Leibowitz brings her soup and funny bread that is twisted. Mam tries to slice it, but Mrs. Leibowitz laughs and tells her, just pull. Malachy calls it pull bread, but Mrs. Leibowitz says, no, it's challah, and teaches us how to say it. She shakes her head. Oh, you Irish, you'll live forever, but you'll never say challah like a chew. Minnie McAdory brings potatoes and cabbage and sometimes a piece of meat. Ach, times are hard, Angela, but that lovely man, Mr. Roosevelt, will find a job for everyone, and your husband will have work. Poor man, it's not his fault there's a depression. He looks for work day and night. My Dan is lucky, 4 years with the city, and he don't drink. He grew up in Tuam with your husband. Some drink, some don't. Curse of the Irish. Now eat, Angela. Build yourself up after your loss. Mr. McAdory tells Dad there's work with the WPA, and when he gets the work, there's money for food, and Mam leaves the bed to clean the twins and to feed us. When Dad comes home with the drink smell, there's no money, and Mam screams at him till the twins cry, and Maliki and I run out to the playground. On those nights, Mam crawls back into bed, and Dad sings the sad songs about Ireland. Why doesn't he hold her and help her sleep the way he did with my little sister who died? Why doesn't he sing a Margaret song, or a song that will dry Mam's tears? He still gets Maliki and me out of bed to stand in our shirts, promising to die for Ireland. One night, he wanted to make the twins promise to die for Ireland, but they can't even talk, and Mam screamed at him, "You mad old bastard, can't you leave the children alone?" He'll give us a nickel for ice cream if we promise to die for Ireland, and we promise, but we never get the nickel. We get soup from Mrs. Leibowitz and mashed potatoes from Minnie McAdory, and they show us how to take care of the twins, how to wash their bottoms, how to wash diaper rags after they get them all shitty. Mrs. Leibowitz calls them diapers, and Minnie calls them nappies, but it doesn't matter what they call them because the twins get them shitty anyway. If Mam stays in the bed and Dad goes out looking for a job, we can do what we like all day. We can put the twins in the small swings in the park and swing them till they get hungry and cry. The Italian man calls to me from across the street, "Hey, Frankie, come here. Watch out crossing the street. Them twins hungry again?" He gives us bits of cheese and ham and bananas, but I can't eat bananas anymore after the way the birds spat blood at Cuchulainn. The man says his name is Mr. Domino, and that's his wife, Angela, behind the counter. I tell him that's my mother's name. "No kidding, kid. Your mother's Angela? Didn't know the Irish had any Angelas. Hey, Angela, mother's name is Angela." She smiles. She says, "That's a nice." Mr. Domino asks me about Mam and Dad and who cooks for us. I tell him we get food from Mrs. Leibowitz and Minnie McAdory. I tell him all about the diapers and the nappies and how they get shitty anyway, and he laughs. "Angela, you listen to this? Thank God you're Italian, Angela." He says, "Kid, I got to talk to Mrs. Leibowitz. You got to have relations can take care of you. You see Minnie McAdory? Tell her come in to see me. You kids running wild." Two big women are at the door. They say, "Who are you?" "I'm Frank." "Frank, how old are you?" "I'm 4, going on 5. You're not very big for your age, are you?" "I don't know." "Is your mother here?" "She's in the bed." "What's she doing in the bed on a fine day in the middle of the day?" "She's sleeping." "Well, we'll come in. We have to talk to your mother." They brush past me into the room. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, the smell of this place. And who are these children? Maliki runs smiling to the big women. When he smiles, you can see how white and straight and pretty his teeth are, and you can see the shiny blue of his eyes, the pink of his cheeks. All that makes the big women smile, and I wonder why they didn't smile when they talked to me. Maliki says, "I'm Maliki, and this is Oliver, and this is Eugene. They're twins, and that's Frankie over there." The big woman with the brown hair says, "Well, you're not a bit shy, are you? I'm your mother's cousin Philomena, and this is your mother's cousin Delia. I'm Mrs. Flynn, and she's Mrs. Fortune, and that's what you call us." "Good God," says Philomena. "These twins are naked. Don't you have clothes for them?" Maliki says, "They're all shitty." Delia barks. "See, that's what happens, a mouth like a sewer. And no wonder with the father from the north. Don't use that word. That's a bad word, a curse word. You could go to hell using a word like that." "What's hell?" says Maliki. "You'll know soon enough," says Delia. The big women sit at the table with Mrs. Leibowitz and Minnie McAdory. Philomena says it's terrible what happened to Angela's little baby. They heard all about it, and you'd wonder, wouldn't you, what they did with the little body? You might wonder, and I might wonder, but Tommy Flynn didn't wonder. Tommy said that Maliki from the north got money for that baby. "Money," says Mrs. Leibowitz. "That's right," says Philomena. "Money. They take bodies any age and do experiments on them, and there's not much left to give back. Nor would you want back bits of baby when they can't be buried in consecrated ground in that condition." "That's terrible," says Mrs. Leibowitz. "A father or mother would never give the baby for something like that." "They would," says Delia, "when they have the craving for the drink. They'd give their own mothers when they have the craving, so what's a baby that's dead and gone in the first place?" Mrs. Leibowitz shakes her head and rocks in her chair. "Aye," she says, "aye, aye, aye. The poor baby, the poor mother. I thank God my husband don't have no, what you call it, craving. Right, craving. It's the Irish have the craving." "Not my husband," says Philomena. "I'd break his face if he came home with the craving. Of course, Delia's Jimmy has the craving. Every Friday night you see him slipping into the saloon. You needn't start insulting my Jimmy, says Delia. He works, he brings home his wages. You'd want to keep an eye on him, says Philomena. The craving could get the better of him, and you'd have another Malachi from the north on your hands. Mind your own bloody business, says Delia. At least Jimmy is Irish, not born in Brooklyn like your Tommy. Philomena has no answer for that. Minnie is holding her baby, and the big women say she's a lovely baby, clean, not like this pack of Angelas running around this place. Philomena says she doesn't know where Angela got her dirty habits because Angela's mother was spotless, so clean you could eat your dinner off her floor. I wonder why you'd want to eat your dinner off the floor when you had a table and a chair. Delia says something has to be done about Angela and these children, for they are a disgrace, so they are, enough to make you ashamed to be related. A letter has to be written to Angela's mother. Philomena will write it because a teacher in Limerick told her once she had a fine fist. Delia has to tell Mrs. Leibowitz that a fine fist means good handwriting. Mrs. Leibowitz goes down the hall to borrow her husband's fountain pen, paper, and an envelope. The four women sit at the table and make up a letter to send to my mother's mother. Dear Aunt Margaret, I take pen in hand to write you this letter and hope this finds you as it leaves us in the best of health. My husband Tommy is in fine form working away, and Delia's husband Jimmy is in fine form working away, and we hope this finds you in fine form. I'm very sorry to tell you that Angela is not in fine form as the baby died, the little girl that was called Margaret after yourself. And Angela has not been the same since, lying in the bed with her face to the wall. To make matters worse, sir, we think she's expecting again, and that's too much altogether. The minute she loses one child, there's another one on the way. We don't know how she does it. She's married 4 years, 5 children, and another one on the way. That shows you what can happen when you marry someone from the north, for they have no control over themselves up there, a bunch of Protestants that they are. He goes out for work every day, but we know he spends all his time in the saloons and gets a few dollars for sweeping floors and lifting barrels, and spends the money right back on the drink. It's terrible, Aunt Margaret, and we all think Angela and the children would be better off in her native land. We don't have the money to buy the tickets ourselves, for times is hard, but you might be able to see your way. Hoping this finds you in fine form as it leaves us, thank God and his blessed mother. I remain your loving niece, Philomena Flynn, what was McNamara. And last but not least, your niece, Delia Fortune, what was McNamara too, ha ha ha. Grandma Sheehan sent money to Philomena and Delia. They bought the tickets, found the steamer trunk at the St. Vincent de Paul Society, hired a van to take us to the pier in Manhattan, put us on the ship, said goodbye and good riddance, and went away. The ship pulled away from the dock. Ma'am said, "That's the Statue of Liberty, and that's Ellis Island where all the immigrants came in." Then she leaned over the side and vomited, and the wind from the Atlantic blew it all over us and the other happy people admiring the view. Passengers cursed and ran. Seagulls came from all over the harbour, and Ma'am hung, limp and pale, on the ship's rail. In a week, we arrived at Moville, County Donegal, where we took a bus to Belfast and from there another bus to Tuam, in County Antrim. We left the trunk in a shop and set out to walk the 2 miles up the road to Grandpa McCourt's house. It was dark on the road, the dawn barely stirring on the hills beyond. Dad carried the twins in his arms, and they took turns crying with the hunger. Ma'am stopped every few minutes to sit and rest on the stone wall along the road. We sat with her and watched the sky turn red and then blue. Birds started to chirp and sing in the trees, and as the dawn came up, we saw strange creatures in the fields, standing, looking at us. Maliki said, "What are they, Dad?" "Cows, son." "What are cows, Dad?" "Cows are cows, son." We walked farther along the brightening road, and there were other creatures in the fields, white furry creatures. Maliki said, "What are they, Dad?" "Sheep, son." "What are sheep, Dad?" My father barked at him. "Is there any end to your questions? Sheep are sheep, cows are cows, and over there, that's a goat. A goat is a goat. The goat gives milk, the sheep gives wool, the cow gives everything. What else in God's name do you want to know?" And Maliki yelped with fright because Dad never talked like that, never spoke sharply to us. He might get us up in the middle of the night and make us promise to die for Ireland, but he never barked like this. Maliki ran to Mam and she said, There, love, don't cry. Your father is just worn out carrying the twins, and 'tis hard answering all those questions when you're carting twins through the world." Dad set the twins on the road and held out his arms to Maliki. Now the twins started to cry, and Maliki clung to Mam, sobbing. The cows mooed, the sheep mad, the goat The birds twittered in the trees, and the beep-beep of a motor car cut through everything. A man called from the motor car. "Good Lord, what are you people doing on this road at this hour of an Easter Sunday morning?" Dad said, "Good morning, Father." "Father," I said. "Dad, is that your father?" Mam said, "Don't ask him any questions." Dad said, No, this is a priest." Maliki said, "What's that?" But Mam put her hand over his mouth. The priest had white hair and a white collar. He said, "Where are you going?" Dad said, "Up the road to McCourt's of Moneyglass." And the priest took us in his motor car. He said he knew the McCourts, a fine family, good Catholics, some daily communicants, and he hoped he'd see us all at Mass, especially the little Yankees who didn't know what a priest was, God help us. At the house, my mother reaches for the gate latch. Dad says, No, not that way, not the front gate. They use the front door only for visits from the priest or funerals. We make our way around the house to the kitchen door. Dad pushes in the door, and there's Grandpa McCourt drinking tea from a big mug, and Grandma McCourt frying something. "Ach," says Grandpa, "you're here." "Ach, we are," says Dad. He points at my mother. "This is Angela," he says. Grandpa says, "Ach, you must be worn out, Angela." Grandma says nothing. She turns back to the frying pan. Grandpa leads us through the kitchen to a large room with a long table and chairs. He says, "Sit down and have some tea. Would you like box tea?" Maliki says, "What's box tea?" Dad laughs. "Pancakes, son. Pancakes made with potatoes." Grandpa says, "We have eggs. It's Easter Sunday, and you can have all the eggs you can hold." We have tea and box tea and boiled eggs, and we all fall asleep. I wake up in a bed with Maliki and the twins. My parents are in another bed over by the window. Where am I? It's getting dark. This is not the ship. Mam snores, hink. Dad snores, honk. I get up and poke at Dad. "I have to pee." He says, "Use the chamber pot." "What?" "Under the bed, son, the chamber pot. It has roses on it and maidens cavorting in the glen. Pee in that, son." I want to ask him what he's talking about, for even if I'm bursting, I feel strange peeing into a pot with roses and maidens cavorting, whatever they are. We had nothing like this in Pleasant Avenue, where Mrs. Leibowitz sang in the lavatory, while we clutched ourselves in the hall. Now Maliki has to use the chamber pot, but he wants to sit on it. Dad says, "No, you can't do that, son. You have to go outside." When he says that, I have to go too, to sit. He leads us downstairs and through the big room where Grandpa is sitting reading by the fire and Grandma is dozing in her chair. It's dark outside, but the moon is bright enough for us to see where we're going. Dad opens the door of a little house that has a seat with a hole in it. He shows Maliki and me how to sit on the hole and how to wipe ourselves with squares of newspaper stuck in an air. Then he tells us wait outside while he goes inside, closes the door and grunts. The moon is so bright I can look down the field and see the things called cows and sheep, and I wonder why they don't go home. In the house, there are other people in the room with my grandparents. Dad says, "These are your aunts, Emily, Nora, Maggie, Vera. Your Aunt Eva is in Ballymena with children like you." My aunts are not like Mrs. Leibowitz and Minnie McAdory. They nod their heads, but they don't hug us or smile. Mam comes into the room with the twins, and when Dad tells his sisters, "This is Angela, and these are the twins," they just nod again. Grandma goes to the kitchen, and soon we have bread and sausages and tea. The only one who speaks at the table is Maliki. He points his spoon at the aunts and asks their names again. When Mam tells him eat his sausage and be quiet, his eyes fill with tears, and Aunt Nora reaches over to comfort him. She says, "There, there." And I wonder why everyone says "there, there" when Maliki cries. I wonder what "there, there" means. It's quiet at the table till Dad says, "Things are terrible in America." Grandma says, "Ach, I read it in the paper. But they say Mr. Roosevelt is a good man, and if you stayed, you might have work by now." Dad shakes his head, and Grandma says, "I don't know what you're going to do, Maliki. Things are worse here than they are in America. No work here, and God knows we don't have room in this house for 6 more people." Dad says, "I thought I might get work on some of the farms. We could get a small place." "Where would you stay in the meantime?" says Grandma. "And how would you support yourself and your family?" "Ach, I could go on the dole, I suppose." "You can't get off a ship from America and go on the dole," says Grandpa. "They make you wait a while. And what would you do while you're waiting?" Dad says nothing, and Mam looks straight ahead at the wall. "You'll be better off in the Free State," says Grandma. "Dublin is big, and surely there's work there, or in the farms around." "And you're entitled to the money from the IRA too," says Grandpa. "You did your bit, and they've been handing out money to men all over the Free State. You could go to Dublin and ask for help. We can loan you the bus fare to Dublin. The twins can sit on your lap and you won't have to pay for them. Dad says, "Ach, aye." And Mam stares at the wall with tears in her eyes. After we ate, we went back to bed, and next morning all the grown-ups sat around looking sad. Soon a man came in a motor car and took us back down the road to the shop which had our trunk. They lifted the trunk up on the roof of a bus, and we got into the bus. Dad said we were going to Dublin. Malachy said, "What's Dublin?" But no one answered him. Dad held Eugene on his lap, and Mam held Oliver. Dad looked out at the fields and told me, "This is where Cuchulainn liked to go for a walk." I asked him where Cuchulainn hit the ball into the dog's mouth, and he said, "A few miles away." Malachy said, "Look, look." And we looked. It was a great silvery sheet of water, and Dad said it was Lough Neagh, the largest lake in Ireland, the lake where Cuchulainn used to swim after his great battles. Cuchulainn would get so hot that when he jumped into Lough Neagh, it boiled over and warmed the surrounding countryside for days. Someday, we'd all come back and go swimming like Cuchulainn himself. We'd fish for eels and fry them in a pan, not like Cuchulainn, who would pluck them from the loch and swallow them wriggling, because there's great power in an eel. Is that right, Dad? 'Tis. Mam didn't look out the window at Lough Neagh. Her cheek rested on top of Oliver's head, and she stared at the floor of the bus. Soon the bus is rolling into a place where there are big houses, motor cars, horses pulling carts, people on bicycles, and hundreds walking. Malachy is excited. "Dad, Dad, where's the playground, the swings? I want to see Freddie Leibowitz." "Ach, son, you're in Dublin now, far from Classen Avenue. You're in Ireland, a long way from New York." When the bus stops, the trunk is lifted down and set on the floor of the bus station. Dad tells Mam she can sit on a bench in the station while he goes to see the IRA man in a place called Terranure. He says there are lavatories in the station for the boys. He won't be long. He'll have money when he returns, and we'll all have food. He tells me go with him, and Mam says, "No, I need him to help." But when Dad says, "I'll need help carrying all that money," she laughs and says, "All right, go with your pop." Your pop. That means she's in a good mood. If she says your father, it means she's in a bad mood. Dad holds my hand as I trot along beside him. He's a fast walker. It's a long way to Terranure, and I'm hoping he'll stop and carry me the way he did with the twins in Tuam. But he lopes along and says nothing except to ask people where Terranure is. In a while he says, "We're in Terranure, and now we have to find Mr. Charles Hegarty of the IRA. A man with a pink patch in his eye tells us we're on the right street. Charlie Hegarty lives at number 14, God blast him." The man tells Dad, "I can see you're a man that did his bit." Dad says, "Ach, I did my bit." And the man says, "I did me bit too. And what did it get me but one eye less and a pension that wouldn't feed a canary?" "But Ireland is free," says Dad, "and that's a grand thing." "Free my arse," says the man. "I think we were better off under the English. Good luck to you anyway, mister, for I think I know what you're here for." A woman opens the door at number 14. "I'm afraid," she says, "that Mr. Hegarty is busy." Dad tells her he just walked all the way from the middle of Dublin with his small son, that he left wife and 3 children waiting for him at the bus place, and if Mr. Hegarty is that busy, then we'll wait for him on the doorstep. The woman is back in a minute to say that Mr. Hegarty has a little time to spare, and would you come this way? Mr. Hegarty is sitting at a desk near a glowing fire. He says, "What can I do for you?" Dad stands before the desk and says, "I've just returned from America with wife and 4 children. We have nothing. I fought with the flying column during the Troubles, and I'm hoping you can help me now in the time of need." Mr. Hegarty takes Dad's name and turns the pages of a big book on his desk. He shakes his head. No record of your service here." Dad makes a long speech. He tells Mr. Hegarty how he fought, where, when, how he had to be smuggled out of Ireland because of the price on his head, how he was raising his sons to love Ireland. Mr. Hegarty says he's sorry, but he can't be handing out money to every man who wanders in claiming he did his bit. Dad says to me, "Remember this, Francis. This is the new Ireland. Little men in little chairs with little bits of paper. This is the Ireland men died for." Mr. Hegarty says he'll look into Dad's claim, and he'll be sure to let him know what turns up. He'll let us have money to take the bus back into the city. Dad looks at the coins in Mr. Hegarty's hand and says, "You could add to that and make the price of a pint." "Oh, it's the drink you want, is it?" "1 pint is hardly drink. You'd walk the miles back and make the boy walk because you want a pint, wouldn't you? Walking never killed anyone." "I want you to leave this house," says Mr. Hegarty, "or I'll call a guard, and you can be sure you'll never hear from me again. We're not handing out money to support the Guinness family." Night falls along the streets of Dublin. Children laugh and play under streetlights. Mothers call from doorways. Smells of cooking come at us all the way. Through windows we see people around tables, eating. I'm tired and hungry, and I want Dad to carry me, but I know there's no use asking him now the way his face is tight and set. I let him hold my hand, and I run to keep up with him till we reach the bus place where Mam is waiting with my brothers. They're all asleep on the bench, my mother and 3 brothers. When Dad tells Mam there's no money, she shakes her head and sobs, "Oh, Jesus, what are we going to do?" A man in a blue uniform comes over and asks her, "What's up, missus?" Dad tells him we're stranded there at the bus station. We have no money and no place to stay, and the children are hungry. The man says he's going off duty now. He'll take us to the police barracks, where he has to report anyway, and they'll see what can be done. The man in uniform tells us we can call him guard. That's what you call policemen in Ireland. He asks us what you call policemen in America, and Malachy says, "Cop." The guard pats him on the head and tells him he's a clever little Yankee. At the police barracks, the sergeant tells us we can spend the night. He's sorry, but all he can offer is the floor. It's Thursday, and the cells are filled with men who drank their dole money and wouldn't leave the pubs. The guard gives us hot sweet tea and thick slices of bread slathered with butter and jam, and we're so happy we run round the barracks playing. The guard says we're a great bunch of little Yanks and they'd like to take us home, but I say no. Malachy says no. The twins say no, no, and all the guards laugh. Men in cells reach out and pat our heads. They smell like Dad when he comes home singing about Kevin Barry and Roddy McCauley going to die. The men say, "Jesus, will you listen to them? They sound like bloody film stars. They just fall out of the sky or what?" Women in cells at the other end tell Malachy he's gorgeous and the twins are dotes. One woman talks to me. "Come here, love. Would you like a sweet?" I nod and she says, "All right, put your hand out." She takes something sticky from her mouth, puts it in my hand. "There you are now," she says. "Nice bit of butterscotch. Put that in your mouth." I don't want to put it in my mouth because it's sticky and wet from her mouth. But I don't know what you're supposed to do when a woman in a cell offers you sticky butterscotch, and I'm about to put it in my mouth when a guard comes, takes the butterscotch and throws it back at the woman. "You drunken whore," he says. "Leave the child alone," and all the women laugh. The sergeant gives my mother a blanket, and she sleeps stretched out on a bench. The rest of us lie on the floor. Dad sits with his back to the wall, his eyes open under the peak of his cap, and he smokes when the guards give him cigarettes. The guard who threw the butterscotch at the woman says he's from Ballymena in the north, and he talks with Dad about people they know there, and in other places like Cushendall and Tuam. The guard says he'll have a pension someday, and he'll live on the shores of Loch Ness and fish his days away. Eels, he says, eels galore. Jesus, I love a fried eel. I ask Dad, "Is this Cohoolin?" And the guard laughs till his face turns red. Mother of God, did you hear that? The lad wants to know if I'm Cohoolin. A little Yankee, and he knows all about Cohoolin. Dad says, "No, he's not Cohoolin, but he's a fine man who will live on the shores of Loch Ness and fish his days away." Dad is shaking me. "Up, Francis, up." It's noisy in the barracks. A boy mopping the floor is singing. I tell him that's my mother's song, and he's to stop singing it, but he just puffs at his cigarette and walks away, and I wonder why people have to sing other people's songs. Men and women coming out of the cells are yawning and grunting. The woman who offered me the butterscotch stops and says, "I had a drop-taken child. I'm sorry I made a fool of you." But the guard from Ballymena tells her, "Move on, you old whore, before I lock you up again." "Oh, lock me up," she says. "In, out, what does it matter, you blue-arse bastard?" Mam is sitting up at the bench, a blanket wrapped around her. A woman with grey hair brings her a mug of tea and tells her, "Sure, I'm the sergeant's wife, and he said you might need help. Would you like a nice soft-boiled egg, missus?" Mam shakes her head. "No." "No, missus, surely you should have a nice egg in your condition." But Mam shakes her head, and I wonder how she can say no to a soft-boiled egg when there's nothing in the world like it. "All right, Mam," says the sergeant's wife. "A bit of toast, then, and something for the children and your poor husband." She goes back to another room, and soon there's tea and bread. Dad drinks his tea, but gives us his bread. And Mam says, "Will you eat your bread for God's sake? You won't be much use to us falling down with the hunger." He shakes his head and asks the sergeant's wife if there's any chance of a cigarette. She brings him the cigarette and tells Mam the guards in the barracks have taken up a collection to pay our train fares to Limerick. There will be a motor car to pick up our trunk and leave us at Kingsbridge railway station. And you'll be in Limerick in 3 or 4 hours. Mam puts up her arms and hugs the sergeant's wife. "God bless you and your husband and all the guards," Mam says. "I don't know what we do without you. God knows 'tis a lovely thing to be back among our own." 'Tis the least we could do, says the sergeant's wife. These are lovely children you have, and I'm from Cork myself, and I know what 'tis to be in Dublin without two pennies to rub together. Dad sits at the other end of the bench, smoking his cigarette, drinking his tea. He stays that way till the motor car comes to take us through the streets of Dublin. Dad asks the driver if he'd mind going by way of the GPO, and the driver says, "Is it a stamp you want or what?" "No," says Dad. "I hear they put up a new statue of Cuchulainn to honour the men who died in 1916, and I'd like to show it to my son here, who has a great admiration for Cuchulainn." The driver says he has no notion of who this Cuchulainn was, but he wouldn't mind stopping one bit. He might come in himself and see what the commotion is all about, for he hasn't been in the GPO since he was a boy, and the English nearly wrecked it with their big guns firing up from the Liffey River. He says you'll see the bullet holes all over the front, and they should be left there to remind the Irish of English perfidy. I asked the man, "What's perfidy?" And he says, "Ask your father." And I would, but we're stopping outside a big building with columns, and that's the GPO. Mam stays in the motor car while we follow the driver into the GPO. "There he is," he says. "There's your man, Cuchulainn." And I feel tears coming because I'm looking at him at last. Cuchulainn, there on his pedestal in the GPO. He's golden, and he has long hair. His head is hanging, and there's a big bird perched on his shoulder. The driver says, "Now what in God's name is this all about? What's this fella doing with the long hair and the bird on his shoulder? And will you kindly tell me, mister, what this has to do with the men of 1916? Dad says, "Cuchulainn fought to the end like the men of Easter week. His enemies were afraid to go near him till they were sure he was dead. And when the bird landed on him and drank his blood, they knew." "Well," says the driver, "'tis a sad day for the men of Ireland when they need a bird to tell them a man is dead. I think we'd better go now, or we'll be missing that train to Limerick." The sergeant's wife said she'd send a telegram to Grandma to meet us in Limerick. And there she was on the platform, Grandma, with white hair, sour eyes, a black shawl, and no smile from my mother or any of us, even my brother Malachy, who had the big smile and the sweet white teeth. Mam pointed to Dad. "This is Malachy," she said, and Grandma nodded and looked away. She called two boys who were hanging around the railway station and paid them to carry the trunk. The boys had shaved heads, snotty noses, and no shoes, and we followed them through the streets of Limerick. I asked Mam why they had no hair, and she said their heads were shaved so that the lice would have no place to hide. Malachy said, "What's a lice?" And Mam said, "Not lice. One of them is a louse." Grandma said, "Will ye stop it? What kind of talk is this?" The boys whistled and laughed and trotted along as if they had shoes, and Grandma told them, "Stop that laughing, or 'tis dropping and breaking that trunk you'll be." They stopped the whistling and laughing, and we followed them into a park with a tall pillar and a statue in the middle, and grass so green it dazzled you. Dad carried the twins. Mam carried a bag in one hand and held Malachy's hand with the other. When she stopped every few minutes to catch her breath, Grandma said, "Are you still smoking them fags? Them fags will be the death of you. There's enough consumption in Limerick without people smoking fags on top of it, and 'tis a rich man's foolishness." Along the path through the park, there were hundreds of flowers of different colours that excited the twins. They pointed and made squeaky noises, and we laughed, everyone except Grandma, who pulled her shawl over her head. Dad stopped and put the twins down so that they could be closer to the flowers. He said, "Flowers," and they ran back and forth, pointing, trying to say flowers. One of the boys with the trunk said, "God, are they Americans?" And Mam said, "They are. They were born in New York. All the boys were born in New York." The boy said to the other boy, "God, they're Americans." They put the trunk down and stared at us, and we stared back at them till Grandma said, "Are ye going to stand here all day looking at flowers and gawking at each other?" And we all moved on again, out of the park, down a narrow lane, and into another lane to Grandma's house. There is a row of small houses on each side of the lane, and Grandma lives in one of the small houses. Her kitchen has a shiny, polished black iron range with a fire glowing in the grate. There's a table along the wall under the window, and a press opposite with cups and saucers and vases. This press is always locked, and she keeps the key in her purse because you're not supposed to use anything in there unless someone dies or returns from foreign parts or there's a visit by a priest. There's a picture on the wall by the range of a man with long brown hair and sad eyes. He's pointing to his chest where there's a big heart with flames coming out of it. Mam tells us, "That's the Sacred Heart of Jesus." And I want to know why the man's heart is on fire and why doesn't he throw water on it? Grandma says, "Don't these children know anything about their religion?" And Mam tells her it's different in America. Grandma says, The Sacred Heart is everywhere, and there's no excuse for that kind of ignorance. Under the picture of the man with the burning heart, there's a shelf with a red glass holding a flickering candle, and next to it, a small statue. Mam tells us that's the baby Jesus, the infant of Prague, and if you ever need anything, pray to him. Maliki says, "Mam, could I tell him I'm hungry?" And Mam puts her finger to her lips. Grandma grumbles around the kitchen making tea and telling Mam to cut the loaf of bread and don't make the cuts too thick. Mam sits by the table with her breath coming hard and says she'll cut the bread in a minute. Dad takes the knife and starts slicing the bread, and you can see Grandma doesn't like that. She frowns at him but says nothing, even though he makes thick slices. There aren't enough chairs for everyone, so I sit on the stairs with my brother to have bread and tea. Dad and Mam sit at the table, and Grandma sits under the Sacred Heart with her mug of tea. She says, "I don't know under God what I'm going to do with ye. There's no room in this house. There isn't room for even one of ye." Maliki says, "Ye, ye," and starts to giggle, and I say, "Ye, ye," and the twins say, "Ye, ye," and we're laughing so hard we can hardly eat our bread. Grandma glares at us. "What are ye laughing at? There's nothing to laugh at in this house. Ye better behave yourselves before I go over to ye." She won't stop saying ye, and now Maliki is helpless with laughter, spewing out his bread and tea, his face turning red. Dad says, "Maliki, and the rest of you stop it." But Maliki can't. He goes on laughing till Dad says, "Come over here." He rolls up Maliki's sleeve and raises his hand to slap his arm. "Are you going to behave yourself?" Maliki's eyes fill with tears and he nods. "I will," because Dad never raised his hand like that before. Dad says, "Be a good boy and go sit with your brothers." And he pulls down the sleeve and pats Maliki on the head. That night, Mam's sister, Aunt Aggie, came home from her job in the clothing factory. She was big like the McNamara sisters and she had flaming red hair. She wheeled a large bicycle into the little room behind the kitchen and came out to her supper. She was living in Grandma's because she had a fight with her husband, Pat Keating, who told her when he had drink taken, "You're a great fat cow. Go home to your mother." That's what Grandma told Mam, and that's why there was no room for us in Grandma's house. She had herself, Aunt Aggie, and her son Pat, who was my uncle, and who was out selling newspapers. Aunt Aggie complained when Grandma told her Mam would have to sleep with her that night. Grandma said, "Oh, will you shut your gob? 'Tis only for one night and that won't kill you. And if you don't like it, you can go back to your husband where you belong anyway, instead of running home to me. Jesus, Mary, and Holy St. Joseph, look at this house. You and Pat and Angela and her clatter of Americans. Will I have any peace in the latter end of my life?" She spread coats and rags on the floor of the little back room, and we slept there with the bicycle. Dad stayed on a chair in the kitchen, took us to the lavatory in the backyard when we needed it, and in the night hushed the twins when they cried from the cold. In the morning, Aunt Aggie came for her bicycle, telling us, "Will you mind yourselves, will ye? Will you get out of me way?" When she left, Maliki kept saying, "Will you mind yourselves, will ye? Will you get out of the way, will ye?" And I could hear Dad laughing out in the kitchen till Grandma came down the stairs and he had to tell Maliki to be quiet. That day, Grandma and Mam went out and found a furnished room on Windmill Street where Aunt Aggie had a flat with her husband, Pat Keating. Grandma paid the rent, 10 shillings for 2 weeks. She gave Mam money for food, loaned us a kettle, a pot, a frying pan, knives and spoons, jam jars to be used for mugs, a blanket and a pillow. She said that was all she could afford anymore, that Dad would have to get up off his arse, get a job, go on the dole, go for the charity at the St. Vincent de Paul Society, or go on the relief. The room had a fireplace where we could boil water for our tea or an egg in case we ever came into money. We had a table and 3 chairs and a bed, which Mam said was the biggest she had ever seen. We were glad of the bed that night, worn out after nights on floors in Dublin and in Grandma's. Didn't matter that there were 6 of us in the bed. We were together, away from grandmothers and guards. Maliki could say ye, 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 and we could laugh as much as we liked. Dad and Mam lay at the head of the bed, Maliki and I at the bottom, the twins wherever they could find comfort. Maliki made us laugh again. "Yee, yee, yee," he said, and "oi, oi, oi," and then fell asleep. Mam made the little hink-hink snore sound that told us she was sleeping. In the moonlight, I could look up the length of the bed and see Dad still awake. And when Oliver cried in his sleep, Dad reached for him and held him. "Wisht," he said. "Wisht." Then Eugene sat up, screaming, tearing at himself. Mommy, Mommy." Dad sat up. "What? What's up, son?" Eugene went on crying, and when Dad leaped from the bed and turned on the gaslight, we saw the fleas, leaping, jumping, fastened to our flesh. We slapped at them and slapped, but they hopped from body to body, hopping, biting. We tore at the bites till they bled. We jumped from the bed, the twins crying, Mam moaning, oh Jesus, will we have no rest? Dad poured water and salt into a jam jar and dabbed at our bites. The salt burned, but he said we'll feel better soon. Mam sat by the fireplace with the twins in her lap. Dad pulled on his trousers and dragged the mattress off the bed and out to the street. He filled the kettle and the pot with water, stood the mattress against the wall, pounded it with the shoe, told me to keep pouring water on the ground to drown the fleas dropping there. The Limerick moon was so bright I could see bits of it shimmering in the water, and I wanted to scoop up moon bits, but how could I with the fleas leaping on my legs? Dad kept pounding with the shoe, and I had to run back through the house to the backyard tap for more water in the kettle and the pot. Mam said, look at you. Your shoes are drenched, and you'll catch your death, and your father will surely get the pneumonia without his shoe to his foot. A man on a bicycle stopped and wanted to know why Dad was beating that mattress. Mother of God, he said, I never heard such a cure for fleas. Do you know that if a man could jump like a flea, one leap would take him halfway to the moon? The thing to do is this. When you go back inside with that mattress, stick it on the bed upside down, and that will confuse the little buggers. They won't know where they are, and they'll be biting the mattress or each other, which is the best cure of all. After they bite the human being, they have the frenzy, you know. For there are other fleas around them that also bit the human being, and the smell of the blood is too much for them, and they go out of their minds. They're a right bloody torment, and I should know, for didn't I grow up in Limerick, down in the Irish town? And the fleas there were so plentiful and forward they'd sit on the toe of your boot and discuss Ireland's woeful history with you. It is said there were no fleas in ancient Ireland, that they were brought in by the English to drive us out of our wits entirely, and I wouldn't put it past the English. And isn't it a very curious thing that St. Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland and the English brought in the fleas? For centuries, Ireland was a lovely, peaceful place. Snakes gone, not a flea to be found. You could stroll the 4 green fields of Ireland without fear of snakes and have a good night's sleep with no fleas to bother you. Them snakes were doing no harm. They wouldn't bother you unless you corner them, and they lived off other creatures that move under bushes and such places, whereas the flea sucks the blood from you morning, noon and night, for that's his nature. He can't help himself. I hear for a fact that places that have snakes galore have no fleas. Arizona, for instance. You're forever hearing about the snakes of Arizona, but when did you ever hear of fleas in Arizona? Good luck to you. I have to be careful standing here, for if one of them gets on my clothes, I might as well invite his whole family home. They multiply faster than Hindus. Dad said, you wouldn't by any chance have a cigarette, would you? A cigarette? Oh, sure, of course. Here you are. Aren't I nearly destroyed from the fags myself? The old hacking cough, you know. So powerful it nearly knocks me off the bicycle. I can feel that cough stirring in me solar plexus and working its way up through me entrails till the next time it takes off the top of me head. He struck a match in a box, lit a cigarette for himself and held out the match for Dad. Of course, he said, you're bound to have the cough when you live in Limerick because this is the capital city of the weak chest, and the weak chest leads to the consumption. If all the people that has consumption in Limerick were to die, this would be a ghost town. Though I don't have the consumption myself, no. This cough was a present from the Germans. He paused, puffed on his cigarette, and struggled with the cough. Be Jesus, excuse the language, but the fags will get me in the end. Well, I leave you now to the mattress, and remember what I told you. Confuse the little buggers. He wobbled away on his bicycle, the cigarette dangling from his mouth, the cough racking his body. Dad said, Limerick men talk too much. Come on. We'll put this mattress back and see if there's any sleep in this night. Mam sat by the fireplace with the twins asleep in her lap, and Malachy lay curled up on the floor by her feet. She said, who was that you were talking to? It sounded very like Pa Keating, Aggie's husband. I could tell by the cough. He got that cough in France in the war when he swallowed the gas. We slept the rest of that night, and in the morning we saw where the fleas had feasted, our flesh pink with flea welts and bright with the blood of our scratches. Mam made tea and fried bread, and once more Dad dabbed at our bites with the salty water. He hauled the mattress outside again to the backyard. On a cold day like this, the fleas would surely freeze to death, and we'd all have a good night's sleep. A few days later, when we're settled into the room, Dad is shaking me out of my dreams. Up, Francis, up. Put on your clothes and run over for your Aunt Aggie. Your mother needs her. Hurry. Mam is moaning in the bed, her face pure white. Dad has Malachy and the twins out of the bed and sitting on the floor by the dead fire. I run across the street and knock on Aunt Aggie's door till Uncle Pa Keating comes coughing and grumbling. What's up? What's up? My mother is moaning in the bed. I think she's sick. Now Aunt Aggie comes grumbling. Ye are nothing but trouble since ye came from America. Leave him alone, Aggie. He's only a child that's doing what he's told. She tells Uncle Pa go back to bed, that he has to go to work in the morning, not like some from the north that she won't mention. He says, No, I'm coming. There's something wrong with Angela. Dad tells me, sit over there with my brothers. I don't know what's up with Ma'am because everyone is whispering, and I can barely hear Aunt Aggie telling Uncle Pa the child is lost. Run for the ambulance, and Uncle Pa is out the door. Aunt Aggie telling Ma'am, you could say what you like about Limerick, but the ambulance is fast. She doesn't talk to my father, never looks at him. Maliki says, Dad, is Mammy sick? Och, she'll be all right, son. She has to see the doctor. I wonder what child is lost, because we're all here, 1, 2, 3, 4 of us, not a lost child anywhere, and why can't they tell me what's wrong with my mother? Uncle Pa comes back, and the ambulance is right behind him. A man comes in with a stretcher, and after they carry Mam away, there are blood spots on the floor by the bed. Maliki bit his tongue, and there was blood, and the dog in the street had blood, and he died. I want to ask Dad to tell me if Mam will be gone forever like my sister Margaret, but he's going with Mam. And there's no use asking Aunt Aggie anything, for fear she'd bite your head off. She wipes away the blood spots and tells us get back into bed and stay there till Dad comes home. It's the middle of the night, and the 4 of us are warm in the bed, and we fall asleep till Dad comes home and tells us Mam is nice and comfortable in the hospital, and she'll be home in no time. Later, Dad goes to the labour exchange for the dole. There is no hope of a labouring man with a North of Ireland accent getting a job in Limerick. When he returns, he tells Mam we'll be getting 19 shillings a week. She says that's just enough for all of us to starve on. 19 shillings for 6 of us? That's less than $4 in American money. And how are we supposed to live on that? What are we to do when we have to pay rent in a fortnight? If the rent for this room is 5 shillings a week, we'll have 14 shillings for food and clothes and coal to boil the water for the tea. Dad shakes his head, sips his tea from a jam jar, stares out the window and whistles The Boys of Wexford. Maliki and Oliver clap their hands and dance around the room, and Dad doesn't know whether to whistle or smile because you can't do both and he can't help himself. He has to stop and smile and pat Oliver's head, and then go back to the whistling. Mam smiles too, but it's a very quick smile, and when she looks into the ashes, you can see the worry where the corners of her mouth turn down. Next day, she tells Dad to mind the twins, and takes Maliki and me with her to the St. Vincent de Paul Society. We stand in a queue with women wearing black shawls. They ask our names and smile when we talk. They say, Lord above, would you listen to the little Yankees? And they wonder why Mam in her American coat will be looking for charity, since there's hardly enough for the poor people of Limerick without Yanks coming over and taking the bread out of their mouths. Mam tells them a cousin gave her that coat in Brooklyn, that her husband has no work, that she has other children at home, twin boys. The women sniff and pull their shawls about them. They have their own troubles. Mam tells them she had to leave America because she couldn't stand it after her baby girl died. The women sniff again, but now it's because Mam is crying. Some say they lost little ones too, and there's nothing worse in the world. You could live as long as Methuselah's wife, but you'll never get over it. No man can ever know what it is to be a mother that has lost a child. Not if the man lived longer than 2 Methuselahs. They all have a good cry, till a red-haired woman passes a little box around. The women pick something from the box between their fingers and stuff it up their noses. A young woman sneezes, and the red-haired woman laughs. Ah, sure, Biddy, you're not able for that snuff. Come here, little Yankee boys, have a pinch. She plants the brown stuff in our nostrils, and we sneeze so hard, the women stop crying and laugh till they have to wipe their eyes with their shawls. Mam tells us, that's good for you, 'twill clear your heads. The young woman, Biddy, tells Mam, we're 2 lovely boys. She points at Maliki. That little fellow with the goldy ringlet, isn't he gorgeous? He could be a film star with Shirley Temple. And Maliki smiles and warms up the queue. The woman with the snuff says to Mam, Missus, I don't want to be forward, but I think you should be sitting down, for we heard about your loss. Another woman worries. Ah, no, they don't like that. Who don't like what? Ah, sure, Nora Malloy, the society don't like us sitting on the steps. They want us to be standing respectful against the wall. They can kiss my arse, says Nora, the red-haired woman. Sit down there, missus, on that step, and I'll sit next to you. And if there's one word out of the St. Vincent de Paul Society, I'll take the face off him, so I will. Do you smoke, missus? I do, says Mam, but I don't have them. Nora takes a cigarette from a pocket in her apron, breaks it, and offers half to Mam. The worried woman says, they don't like that either. They say every fag you smoke is taking food from the mouth of your child. Mr. Quinlivan inside is dead against it. He says if you have money for the fags, you have money for food. Quinlivan can kiss my arse too, the grinny old bastard. Is he going to begrudge us a puff of a fag, the only comfort we have in the world? A door opens at the end of the hall, and a man appears. Are any of ye waiting for children's boots? Women raise their hands. I am. Well, the boots are all gone. You'll have to come back next month. But my Mikey needs boots for school. They're all gone, I told you. But 'tis freezing abroad, Mr. Quinlivan. The boots are all gone. Nothing I can do. What's this? Who's smoking? Nora waves her cigarette. I am, she says, and enjoying it down to the last ash. Every puff you take, he starts. I know, she says. I'm taking food out of the mouths of my children. You're insolent, woman. You'll get no charity here. Is that a fact? Well, Mr. Quinlivan, if I don't get it here, I know where I will. What are you talking about? I'll go to the Quakers. They'll give me the charity. Mr. Quinlivan steps towards Nora and points a finger. Do you know what we have here? We have a super in our midst. We had the supers in the famine. The Protestants went round telling good Catholics that if they gave up their faith and turned Protestant, they'd get more soup than their bellies could hold, and God help us, some Catholics took the soup and were known ever after as supers and lost their immortal souls, doomed to the deepest part of hell. And you, woman, if you go to the Quakers, you'll lose your immortal soul and the souls of your children. Then, Mr. Quinlivan, you'll have to save us, won't you? He stares at her, and she stares back at him. His eyes wander to the other women. One puts her hand to her mouth to smother a laugh. What are you tittering about? He barks. Oh, nothing, Mr. Quinlivan, honest to God. I'm telling ye once more, no boots. And he slams the door behind him. One by one, the women are called into the room. When Nora comes out, she's smiling and waving a piece of paper. Boots, she says. 3 pairs I'm getting for my children. Threaten the men in there with the Quakers and they'll give you the drawers off their arses. When Mam is called, she brings Malachi and me in with her. We stand before a table where 3 men are sitting, asking questions. Mr. Quinlivan starts to say something, but the man in the middle says, Enough out of you, Quinlivan. If we left it up to you, we'd have the poor people of Limerick jumping into the arms of the Protestants. He turns to Mam. He wants to know where she got that fine red coat. She tells him what she told the women outside, and when she comes to the death of Margaret, she shakes and sobs. She tells the men she's very sorry for crying like that, but it was only a few months ago, and she's not over it yet. Not even knowing where her baby was buried, if she was buried at all. Not knowing even if she was baptized itself, because she was so weak from having the 4 boys, she didn't have the energy to be going to the church for the baptism. And it's a heart scald to think Margaret might be in limbo forever with no hope of her ever seeing the rest of us, whether we're in heaven, hell, or purgatory itself. Mr. Quinlivan brings her his chair. I know, missus, I know. Sit down, will you? I know. The other men look at the table, the ceiling. The man in the middle says he's giving Mam a docket to get a week's groceries at McGrath's shop on Parnell Street. There will be tea, sugar, flour, milk, butter, and a separate docket for a bag of coal from Sutton's coal yard on the Dock Road. The third man says, Of course you won't be getting this every week, missus. We'll be visiting your house to see if there's a real need. We have to do that, missus, so we can review your claim. Mam wipes her face in the back of her sleeve and takes the docket. She tells the men, God bless you for your kindness. They nod and look at the table, the ceiling, the walls, and tell her, send in the next woman. The women outside tell Mam, when you go to McGrath's, keep an eye on the old bitch, for she'll cheat you on the weight. She'll put stuff on a paper on the scale with the paper hanging down on her side behind the counter, where she thinks you can't see it. She'll put on that paper so that you're lucky if you get half of what you're supposed to get. And she has pictures of the Virgin Mary and the Sacred Heart of Jesus all over the shop, and she's forever on her knees abroad in St. Joseph's Chapel, clacking her rosary beads and breathing like a virgin martyr, the old bitch. Nora says, I'll go with you, missus. I'm on to the same Mrs. McGrath, and I'll know if she's cheating you. She leads the way to the shop on Parnell Street. The woman behind the counter is pleasant to Mam in her American coat, till Mam shows the St. Vincent de Paul docket. The woman says, I don't know what you're doing here at this hour of the day. I never serve the charity cases before 6 in the evening, but this is your first time, and I'll make an exception. She says to Nora, Do you have a docket too? No. I'm a friend helping this poor family with their first docket from the St. Vincent de Paul. The woman lays a sheet of newspaper on the scale, and pours on flour from a large bag. When she finishes pouring, she says, "There's a pound of flour." "I don't think so," says Nora. "That's a very small pound of flour." The woman flushes and glares. "Are you accusing me?" "Ah, no, Mrs. McGrath," says Nora. "I think there was a little accident there the way your hip was pressed against that paper. And you didn't even know the paper was pulled down a bit. Oh, God, no. A woman like you that's forever on her knees before the Virgin Mary is an inspiration to all of us. And is that your money I see there on the floor?" Mrs. McGrath steps back quickly, and the needle on the scale jumps and quivers. "What money?" she says, till she looks at Nora and knows. Nora smiles. "Must be a trick of the shadows," she says, and smiles at the scale. "There was a mistake right enough, for that shows barely half a pound of flour." "That scale gives me more trouble," says Mrs. McGrath. "I'm sure it does," says Nora. "But my conscience is clear before God," says Mrs. McGrath. "I'm sure it is," says Nora. "And you're admired by one and all at the St. Vincent de Paul Society and the Legion of Mary." "I try to be a good Catholic." "Try? God knows 'tis little trying you'd have, for you're well known for having a kind heart. And I was wondering if you could spare a couple of sweets for the little boys here." "Well, now, I'm not a millionaire, but here." "God bless you, Mrs. McGrath. And I know it's asking a lot, but could you possibly lend me a couple of cigarettes?" "Well, now, they're not on the docket. I'm not here to supply luxuries." "If you could see your way, Mrs., I'd be sure to mention your kindness to the St. Vincent de Paul." All right, says Mrs. McGrath. "One time for the cigarettes, and one time only." "God bless you," says Nora. "And I'm sorry you had so much trouble with that scale." On the way home, we stopped in the People's Park and sat on a bench while Malachy and I sucked on our sweets, and Mam and Nora smoked their cigarettes. The smoking brought on Nora's cough, and she told Mam the fags would kill her in the end, that there was a touch of consumption in her family, and no one lived to a ripe old age. Though who would want to in Limerick, a place where you could look around and the first thing you noticed was the scarcity of grey hairs, all the grey hairs either in the graveyard or across the Atlantic working on railroads or sauntering around in police uniforms. "You're lucky, Mrs., that you saw a bit of the world. Oh, God, I'd give anything to see New York, people dancing up and down Broadway without a care. No, I had to go and fall for a boozer with the charm, Peter Malloy, a champion pint drinker that had me up the pole and up the aisle when I was barely 17. I was ignorant, Mrs. We grew up ignorant in Limerick, so we did, knowing feck all about anything. And signs on, we're mothers before we're women. And there's nothing here but rain and old biddies saying the rosary. I'd give me teeth to get out, go to America, or even England itself. The champion pint drinker is always on the dole, and sometimes he even drinks that, and drives me so demented I wind up in the lunatic asylum." She drew on her cigarette and gagged, coughing till her body rocked back and forth, and in between the coughs she whimpered, "Jesus, Jesus." When the cough died away, she said she had to go home and take her medicine. She said, "I'll see you next week, Mrs., at the St. Vincent de Paul. If you're stuck for anything, send a message to me at Vices Field. Ask anyone for the wife of Peter Malloy, champion pint drinker." Eugene is sleeping under a coat on the bed. Dad sits by the fireplace, with Oliver on his lap. I wonder why Dad is telling Oliver a Cahoolan story. He knows the Cahoolan stories are mine. But when I look at Oliver, I don't mind. His cheeks are bright red, he's staring into the dead fire, and you can see he has no interest in Cahoolan. Mam puts her hand on his forehead. "I think he has a fever," she says. "I wish I had an onion, and I'd boil it in milk and pepper. That's good for the fever. But even if I had, what would I boil the milk on? We need coal for that fire." She gives Dad the docket for the coal down the dock road. He takes me with him, but it's dark, and all the coal yards are closed. "What are we going to do now, Dad?" "I don't know, son. Ahead of us, women in shawls and small children are picking up coal along the road." "There, Dad, there's coal." "Och, no, son. We won't pick coal off the road. We're not beggars." He tells Mam the coal yards are closed and we'll have to drink milk and eat bread tonight. But when I tell her about the women on the road, she passes Eugene to him. "If you're too grand to pick coal off the road, I'll put on my coat and go down the dock road." She gets a bag and takes Malachy and me with her. Beyond the dock road, there's something wide and dark with lights glinting on it. Mam says that's the River Shannon. She says that's what she missed most of all in America, the River Shannon. The Hudson was lovely, but the Shannon sings. I can't hear the song, but my mother does, and that makes her happy. The other women are gone from the dock road, and we search for the bits of coal that drop from lorries. Mam tells us gather anything that burns: coal, wood, cardboard, paper. She says there are them that burn the horse dropping, but we're not gone that low yet. When her bag is nearly full, she says, now we have to find an onion for Oliver. Maliki says he'll find one, but she tells him, no, you don't find onions on the road, you get them in shops. The minute he sees a shop, he cries out, there's a shop, and runs in. Onion, he says, onion for Oliver. Mam runs into the shop and tells the woman behind the counter, I'm sorry. The woman says, Lord, he's a dolt. Is he an American or what? Mam says he is. The woman smiles and shows 2 teeth, one on each side of her upper gum. A dolt, she says, and look at them gorgeous goldy curls. And what is it he wants now? A sweet? I know, says Mam. An onion. The woman laughs. An onion? I never heard a child wanted an onion before. Is that what they like in America? Mam says, I just mentioned I wanted to get an onion for my other child that's sick. Boil the onion in milk, you know. True for you, missus. You can't beat the onion boiled in milk. And look, little boy, here's a sweet for yourself, and one for the other little boy, the brother, I suppose. Mam says, sure you shouldn't. Say thank you, boys. The woman says, here's a nice onion for the sick child, missus. Mam says, oh, I can't buy the onion now, missus. I don't have a penny on me. I'm giving you the onion, missus. Let it never be said a child went sick in Limerick for want of an onion. And don't forget to sprinkle in a little pepper. Do you have pepper, missus? No, I don't, but I should be getting it any day now. Well, here, missus, pepper and a little salt. Do the child all the good in the world. Mam says, God bless you, ma'am. And her eyes are watery. Dad is walking back and forth with Oliver in his arms, and Eugene is playing on the floor with a pot and a spoon. Dad says, did you get the onion? I did, says Mam, and more. I got coal and the way of lighting it. I knew you would. I said a prayer to St. Jude. He's my favourite saint, patron of desperate cases. I got the coal, I got the onion, no help from St. Jude. Dad says, you shouldn't be picking up coal off the road like a common beggar. It isn't right. Bad example for the boys. Then you should have sent St. Jude down the dock road. Maliki says, I'm hungry. And I'm hungry too. But Mam says, you'll wait till Oliver has his onion boiled in milk. She gets the fire going, cuts the onion in half, drops it in the boiling milk with a little butter, and sprinkles the milk with pepper. She takes Oliver on her lap and tries to feed him, but he turns away and looks into the fire. Come on, love, she says. Good for you. Make you big and strong. He tightens his mouth against the spoon. She puts the pot down, rocks him till he's asleep, lays him on the bed, and tells the rest of us be quiet or she'll demolish us. She slices the other half of the onion and fries it in butter with slices of bread. She lets us sit on the floor around the fire where we eat the fried bread and sip at the scalding sweet tea in jam jars. She says, that fire is good and bright, so we can turn off that gas light till we get money for the meter. The fire makes the room warm, and with the flames dancing in the coal, you can see faces and mountains and valleys and animals leaping. Eugene falls asleep on the floor, and Dad lifts him to the bed beside Oliver. Mam puts the boiled onion pot up on the mantelpiece for fear a mouse or a rat might be at it. She says she's tired out from the day, the St. Vincent de Paul Society, Mrs. McGrath's shop, the search for coal down the dock road, the worry over Oliver not wanting the boiled onion. And if he's like this tomorrow, she's taking him to the doctor. And now she's going to bed. Soon we're all in bed. And if there's the odd flea, I don't mind, because it's warm in the bed with the 6 of us. And I love the glow of the fire, the way it dances on the walls and ceiling, and makes the room go red and black, till it dims to white and black. And all you can hear is a little cry from Oliver, turning in my mother's arms. In the morning, Dad is lighting the fire, making tea, cutting the bread. He's already dressed, and he's telling Mam, hurry up and get dressed. He says to me, Francis, your little brother Oliver is sick, and we're taking him to the hospital. You are to be a good boy and take care of your 2 brothers. We'll be back soon. Mam says, when we're out, go easy with that sugar. We're not millionaires. When Mam picks up Oliver and wraps him in a coat, Eugene stands in the bed. I want Ollie, he says. Ollie, play. Ollie will be back soon, she says, and you can play with him. Now you can play with Maliki and Frank. Ollie, Ollie, I want Ollie. He follows Oliver with his eyes, and when they're gone, he sits on the bed looking out the window. Maliki says, Jeanie, Jeanie, we have bread, we have tea. Sugar on your bread, Jeanie. He shakes his head, and pushes away the bread Malachi is offering. He crawls to the place where Oliver slept with Mam, puts his head down, and stares out the window. Grandma's at the door. I heard your father and mother were running down Henry Street with the child in their arms. Now where are they gone to? Oliver is sick, I said. He wouldn't eat the boiled onion and milk. What are you blathering about? Wouldn't eat the boiled onion and got sick. And who's minding ye? I am. And what's up with the child in the bed? What's his name? That's Eugene. He misses Oliver. They're twins. I know they're twins. That child looks starved. Have ye any porridge here? What's porridge? Says Malachi. Jesus, Mary and Holy St. Joseph, what's porridge? Porridge is porridge. That's what porridge is. Ye are the most ignorant bunch of Yanks I ever seen. Come on, put on your clothes and we'll go across the street to your Aunt Aggie. She's there with her husband, Pa Keating, and she'll give you some porridge. She picks up Eugene, wraps him in her shawl, and we cross the street to Aunt Aggie's. She's living with Uncle Pa again because he said she wasn't a fat cow after all. Do you have any porridge? Grandma says to Aunt Aggie. Porridge? Am I supposed to be feeding porridge to a crowd of Yanks? Pity about you, says Grandma. It won't kill you to give them a little porridge. And I suppose they'll be wanting sugar and milk on top of everything, or they might be banging on my door looking for an egg if you don't mind. I don't know why we have to pay for Angela's mistakes. Jesus, says Grandma, 'tis a good thing you didn't own that stable in Bethlehem, or the Holy Family would still be wandering the world crumbling with the hunger. Grandma pushes her way past Aunt Aggie, puts Eugene on a chair near the fire, and makes the porridge. A man comes in from another room. He has black curly hair, and his skin is black, and I like his eyes because they're very blue, and ready to smile. He's Aunt Aggie's husband, the man who stopped the night we were attacking the fleas, and told us all about fleas and snakes, the man with the cough he got from swallowing gas in the war. Malachi says, Why are you all black? And Uncle Pa Keating laughs and coughs so hard he has to ease himself with a cigarette. Oh, the little Yanks, he says. They're not a bit shy. I'm black because I work at the Limerick Gas Works shoveling coal and coke into the furnaces, gassed in France, and back to Limerick to work in the gas works. When you grow up, you'll laugh. Malachi and I have to leave the table so the big people can sit and have tea. They have their tea, but Uncle Pa Keating, who is my uncle because he's married to my Aunt Aggie, picks up Eugene and takes him on his lap. He says, this is a sad little fella, and makes funny faces and silly sounds. Malachi and I laugh, but Eugene only reaches up to touch the blackness of Pa Keating's skin. And then when Pa pretends to bite his little hand, Eugene laughs, and everyone in the room laughs. Malachi goes to Eugene and tries to make him laugh even more, but Eugene turns away and hides his face in Pa Keating's shirt. I think he likes me, says Pa. And that's when Aunt Aggie puts down her teacup and starts to bawl. Ah! Big teardrops tumbling down her fat, red face. Ah, Jesus, says Grandma. There she is again. What's up with you this time? And Aunt Aggie blubbers. To see Pa there with the child in his lap and me with no hope of having me own. Grandma barks at her. Stop talking like that in front of the children. Have you no shame? When God is good and ready, he'll send you your family. Aunt Aggie sobs. Angela with 5 born and 1 just gone, and her so useless she couldn't scrub a floor, and me with none. And I can scrub and clean with the best and make any class of a stew or a fry. Pa Keating laughs. I think I'll keep this little fella. Malachi runs to him. No, 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 that's my brother. That's Eugene. And I say, no, 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 that's our brother. Aunt Aggie pats the tears on her cheeks. She says, I don't want nothing of Angela's. I don't want nothing that's half Limerick and half north of Ireland, so I don't. So ye can take him home. I'll have me own someday if I have to do 100 novenas to the Virgin Mary and her mother St. Anne, or if I have to crawl from here to Lourdes on me 2 bended knees. Grandma says, That's enough. Ye have had your porridge, and 'tis time to go home and see if your father and mother are back from the hospital. She puts on her shawl and goes to pick up Eugene, but he clutches so hard at Pa Keating's shirt, she has to pull him away, though he keeps looking back at Pa till we're out the door. We followed Grandma back to our room. She put Eugene in the bed and gave him a drink of water. She told him to be a good boy and go to sleep, for his little brother Oliver would be home soon, and they'd be playing again there on the floor. But he kept looking out the window. She told Malachi and me we could sit on the floor and play, but to be quiet because she was going to say her prayers. Malachi went to the bed and sat by Eugene, and I sat on a chair at the table, making out words in the newspaper that was our tablecloth. All you could hear in the room was Malachi whispering to make Eugene happy, and Grandma mumbling to the click of her rosary beads. It was so quiet, I put my head down on the table and fell asleep. Dad is touching my shoulder. Come on, Francis, you have to take care of your little brothers. Mam is slumped on the edge of the bed, making small crying sounds like a bird. Grandma's pulling on her shawl. She says, I'll go down to Thompson the undertaker about the coffin and the carriage. The St. Vincent de Paul Society would surely pay for that, God knows. She goes out the door. Dad stands facing the wall over the fire, beating on his thighs with his fist, sighing, "Och, och, och." Dad frightens me with his "och, och, och," and Mam frightens me with her small bird sounds. And I don't know what to do, though I wonder if anyone will light the fire in the grate so that we can have tea and bread, because it's a long time since we had the porridge. If Dad would move away from the fireplace, I could light the fire myself. All you need is paper, a few bits of coal or turf, and a match. He won't move, so I try to go around his legs while he's beating on his thighs, but he notices me and wants to know why I'm trying to light the fire. I tell him we're all hungry, and he lets out a crazy laugh. "Hungry," he says. "Och, Francis, your wee brother Oliver is dead, your wee sister is dead, and your wee brother is dead." He picks me up and hugs me so hard I cry out. Then Malachi cries, my mother cries, Dad cries, I cry. But Eugene stays quiet. Then Dad sniffles. "We'll have a feast. Come on, Francis." He tells my mother we'll be back in a while, but she has Malachi and Eugene on her lap in the bed and she doesn't look up. He carries me through the streets of Limerick, and we go from shop to shop with him asking for food or anything they can give to a family that has 2 children dead in a year, one in America, one in Limerick, and in danger of losing 3 more for the want of food and drink. Most shopkeepers shake their heads. "Sorry for your troubles, but you could go to the St. Vincent de Paul Society or get the public assistance." Dad says he's glad to see the spirit of Christ alive in Limerick, and they tell him they don't need the likes of him with his northern accent to be telling them about Christ, and he should be ashamed of himself, dragging a child around like that, like a common beggar, a tinker, and knacker. A few shopkeepers give bread, potatoes, tins of beans, and Dad says, "We go home now, and you boys can eat something." But we meet Uncle Pa Keating, and he tells Dad he's very sorry for his troubles, and would Dad like to have a pint in this pub here? There are men sitting in this pub with great glasses of black stuff before them. Uncle Pa Keating and Dad have the black stuff too. They lift their glasses carefully and slowly drink. There is creamy white stuff on their lips, which they lick with little sighs. Uncle Pa gets me a bottle of lemonade, and Dad gives me a piece of bread, and I don't feel hungry anymore. Still, I wonder how long we'll sit here with Malachi and Eugene hungry at home, hours from the porridge, which Eugene didn't eat anyway. Dad and Uncle Pa drink their glass of black stuff and have another. Uncle Pa says, "Frankie, this is the pint. This is the staff of life. This is the best thing for nursing mothers and for those who are long weaned." He laughs, and Dad smiles, and I laugh because I think that's what you're supposed to do when Uncle Pa says something. He doesn't laugh when he tells the other men about Oliver dying. The other men tip their hats to Dad. "Sorry for your troubles, mister, and surely you'll have a pint." Dad says yes to the pints, and soon he's singing Roddy McCauley and Kevin Barry, and song after song I never heard before, and crying over his lovely little girl, Margaret, that died in America, and his little boy, Oliver, dead beyond in the City Home Hospital. It frightens me the way he yells and cries and sings, and I wish I could be at home with my 3 brothers. No, my 2 brothers, and my mother. The man behind the bar says to Dad, "I think now, mister, you've had enough. We're sorry for your troubles, but you have to take that child home to his mother that must be heartbroken by the fire." Dad says, One more pint, just one, huh?" And the man says, "No." Dad shakes his fist. "I did me bit for Ireland." And when the man comes out and takes Dad's arm, Dad tries to push him away. Uncle Pa says, "Come on now, Malachi, stop the blackguarding. You have to go home to Angela. You have a funeral tomorrow, and the lovely children waiting for you." But Dad struggles till a few men push him out into the darkness. Uncle Pa stumbles out with the bag of food. "Come on," he says, "we'll go back to your room." Dad wants to go to another place for a pint, but Uncle Pa says he has no more money. Dad says he'll tell everyone his sorrows, and they'll give him pints. Uncle Pa says that's a disgraceful thing to do, and Dad cries on his shoulder. "You're a good friend," he tells Uncle Pa. He cries again, till Uncle Pa pats him on the back. "It's terrible, terrible," says Uncle Pa. "But you'll get over this in time." Dad straightens up and looks at him. "Never," he says. "Never." Next day, we rode to the hospital in a carriage with a horse. They put Oliver in a white box that came with us in the carriage, and we took him to the graveyard. They put the white box into a hole in the ground and covered it with earth. My mother and Aunt Aggie cried. Grandma looked angry. "Dad, Uncle Pat Keating, and Uncle Pat Sheehan looked sad but did not cry. And I thought that if you're a man, you can cry only when you have the black stuff that is called the pint. I did not like the jackdaws that perched on trees and gravestones, and I did not want to leave Oliver with them. I threw a rock at a jackdaw that waddled over towards Oliver's grave. Dad said I shouldn't throw rocks at jackdaws. They might be somebody's soul. I didn't know what a soul was, but I didn't ask him because I didn't care. Oliver was dead, and I hated jackdaws. I'd be a man someday, and I'd come back with a bag of rocks, and I'd leave the graveyard littered with dead jackdaws. The morning after Oliver's burial, Dad went to the Labour Exchange to sign and collect the week's dole, 19 shillings and sixpence. He said he'd be home by noon, that he'd get coal and make a fire, that we'd have rashers and eggs and tea in honour of Oliver, that we might even have a sweet or two. He wasn't home by noon or 1 or 2, and we boiled and ate the few potatoes the shopkeepers had given the day before. He wasn't home any time before the sun went down that day in May. There was no sign of him till we heard him, long after the pubs closed, rolling along Windmill Street singing, "When all around a vigil keep, the west's asleep, the west's asleep, alas and well may Erin weep, when Connacht lies in slumber deep, there lake and plain smile fair and free, mid rocks the guardian chivalry, sing, oh, let man learn liberty, from crashing wind and lashing sea." He stumbled into the room, hanging onto the wall, a snot oozed from his nose, and he wiped it away with the back of his hand. He tried to speak. "These children should be in bed. Listen to me. Children, go to bed." Mam faced him. "These children are hungry. Where's the dole money? We'll get fish and chips so they'll have something in their bellies when they go to sleep." She tried to stick her hands into his pockets, but he pushed her away. "Have respect," he said. "Respect in front of children." She struggled to get at his pockets. "Where's the money? The children are hungry. You mad old bastard. Did you drink all the money again, just what you did in Brooklyn?" He blubbered. "Och, poor Angela, and poor wee Margaret, and poor wee Oliver." He staggered to me and hugged me, and I smelled the drink I used to smell in America. My face was wet from his tears and his spit and his snot, and I was hungry, and I didn't know what to say when he cried all over my head. Then he let me go and hug Malachy, still going on about the wee sister and the wee brother cold on the ground, and how we all have to pray and be good, how we have to be obedient and do what our mother tells us. He said we have our troubles, but it's time for Malachy and me to start school because there's nothing like an education. It will stand to you in the end, and you have to get ready to do your bit for Ireland. Mam says she can't spend another minute in that room in Windmill Street. She can't sleep with the memory of Oliver in that room, Oliver in the bed, Oliver playing on the floor, Oliver sitting on Dad's lap by the fire. She says it's not good for Eugene to be in that place, that a twin will suffer more over the loss of his brother than even a mother can understand. There's a room going on Hartstone Street with 2 beds instead of the one we have here for the 6 of us. No, the 5 of us. We're getting that room. And to make sure, she's going to the Labour Exchange on Thursday to stand in the queue to take the dole money the minute it's handed to Dad. He says she can't do that. He'd be disgraced with the other men. The Labour Exchange is a place for men, not for women taking the money from under their noses. She says, "Pity about you. If you didn't squander the money in the pubs, I wouldn't have to follow you the way I did in Brooklyn." He tells her he'll be shamed forever. She says she doesn't care. She wants that room on Hartstone Street, a nice, warm, comfortable room with a lavatory down the hall, like the one in Brooklyn. A room without fleas and the dampness that kills. She wants that room because it's on the same street as Leamy's National School. And Malachy and I can come home at the dinner hour, which is noon, for a cup of tea and a cut of fried bread. On Thursday, Mam follows Dad to the Labour Exchange. She marches in behind him, and when the man pushes the money toward Dad, she takes it. The other men in the dole nudge each other and grin, and Dad is disgraced because a woman is never supposed to interfere with a man's dole money. He might want to put 6pence on a horse or have a pint, and if all the women start acting like Mam, the horses will stop running and Guinness will go broke. But she has the money now, and we move to Hartstone Street. Then she carries Eugene in her arms, and we go up the street to Leamy's National School. The headmaster, Mr. Scallon, says we are to return on Monday with a composition book, a pencil, and a pen with a good nib on it. We are not to come to school with ringworm or lice. and our noses are to be blown at all times, not on the floor that spreads consumption, or on our sleeves, but in a handkerchief or a clean rag. He asks us if we are good boys, and when we say we are, he says, "Good Lord, what's this? Are they Yanks or what?" Ma'am tells him about Margaret and Oliver, and he says, Lord above, there's great suffering in the world. Anyway, we put the little fella Malachi in the infants class and his brother in first class. They're in the same room with one master. Monday morning then, 9 o'clock prompt. The boys in Leamy's want to know why we talk like that. Are you Yanks or what? And when we tell them we came from America, they want to know, are you gangsters or cowboys? A big boy sticks his face up to mine. I'm asking ye a question, he says. Are ye gangsters or cowboys? I tell him I don't know. And when he pokes his finger into my chest, Malachi says, I'm a gangster. Frank's a cowboy. The big boy says, your little brother is smart, and you're a stupid Yank. The boys around him are excited. Fight, they yell. Fight. And he pushes me so hard I fall. I want to cry, but the blackness comes over me the way it did with Freddie Leibowitz, and I rush at him, kicking and punching. I knock him down and try to grab his hair to bang his head on the ground, but there's a sharp sting across the back of my legs and I'm pulled away from him. Mr. Benson, the master, has me by the ear, and he's whacking me across the legs. You little hooligan, he says. Is that the kind of behaviour you brought from America? Well, by God, you'll behave yourself before I'm done with you. He tells me hold out one hand, and then the other, and hits me with his stick, once on each hand. Go home now, he says, and tell your mother what a bad boy you were. You're a bad Yank. Say after me, I'm a bad boy. I'm a bad boy. Now say, I'm a bad Yank. I'm a bad Yank. Malachi says, he's not a bad boy. It's that big boy. He said we were cowboys and gangsters. Is that what you did, Heffernan? I was only joking, sir. No more joking, Heffernan. It's not their fault that they're Yanks. 'Tisn't, sir. And you, Heffernan, should get down on your 2 knees every night and thank God you're not a Yank, for if you were, Heffernan, you'd be the greatest gangster on 2 sides of the Atlantic. Al Capone would be coming to you for lessons. You're not to be bothering these 2 Yanks anymore, Heffernan. I won't, sir. And if you do, Heffernan, I'll hang your pelt on the wall. Now go home, all of ye. There are 7 masters in Leamy's National School, and they all have leather straps, canes, blackthorn sticks. They hit you with the sticks on the shoulders, the back, the legs, and especially the hands. If they hit you on the hands, it's called a slap. They hit you if you're late, if you have a leaky nib on your pen, if you laugh, if you talk, and if you don't know things. They hit you if you don't know why God made the world, if you don't know the patron saint of Limerick, if you can't recite the Apostles' Creed, if you can't add 19 to 47, if you can't subtract 19 from 47, if you don't know the chief towns and products of the 32 counties of Ireland, if you can't find Bulgaria on the wall map of the world that's blotted with spit, snot, and blobs of ink thrown by angry pupils expelled forever. They hit you if you can't say your name in Irish, if you can't say the Hail Mary in Irish, if you can't ask for the lavatory pass in Irish. It helps to listen to the big boys ahead of you. They can tell you about the master you have now, what he likes and what he hates. One master will hit you if you don't know that Eamon de Valera is the greatest man that ever lived. Another master will hit you if you don't know that Michael Collins was the greatest man that ever lived. Mr. Benson hates America, and you have to remember to hate America, or he'll hit you. Mr. O'D hates England, and you have to remember to hate England, or he'll hit you. If you ever say anything good about Oliver Cromwell, they'll all hit you. Even if they slap you 6 times on each hand with the ash plant or the blackthorn with the knobs, you must not cry. You'll be a sissy. There are boys who might jeer at you and mock you on the street, but even they have to be careful, because the day will come when the master hits and slaps them, and they have to keep the tears behind their eyes or be disgraced forever. Some boys say it is better to cry because that pleases the masters. If you don't cry, the masters hate you because you've made them look weak before the class, and they promise themselves the next time they have you up, they'll draw tears or blood or both. Big boys in 5th class tell us Mr. O'D likes to get you in front of the class so that he can stand behind you, pinch your sideburns, which are called Cossacks, pull up with them. Up, up, he says, till you're on tiptoe and the tears are filling your eyes. You don't want the boys in the class to see you cry, but pulling on the Cossacks makes the tears come whether you like it or not, and the master likes that. Mr. O'D is the one master who can always bring the tears and the shame. It's better not to cry, because you have to stick with the boys in the school, and you never want to give the masters any satisfaction. If the master hits you, There's no use complaining to your father or mother. They always say, you deserve it. Don't be a baby. I know Oliver is dead, and Malachy knows Oliver is dead, but Eugene is too small to know anything. When he wakes in the morning, he says, Ollie, Ollie, and toddles around the room, looking under the beds. Or he climbs up on the bed by the window and points to children on the street, especially children with fair hair like him and Oliver. Ollie, Ollie, he says, and Mam picks him up, sobs, hugs him. He struggles to get down because he doesn't want to be picked up and hugged. He wants to find Oliver. Dad and Mam tell him Oliver is in heaven playing with angels, and we'll all see him again someday, but he doesn't understand because he's only 2 and doesn't have the words, and that's the worst thing in the whole world. Malachy and I play with him. We try to make him laugh. We make funny faces. We put pots on our heads and pretend to let them fall off. We run across the room and pretend to fall down. We take him to the People's Park to see the lovely flowers, play with dogs, roll in the grass. He sees small children with fair hair like Oliver. He doesn't say Ollie anymore. He only points. Dad says Eugene is lucky to have brothers like Malachy and me because we help him forget, and soon, with God's help, he'll have no memory of Oliver at all. He died anyway. 6 months after Oliver went, we woke on a mean November morning, and there was Eugene cold in the bed beside us. Dr. Troy came and said that child died of pneumonia, and why wasn't he in the hospital long ago? Dad said he didn't know. Mam said she didn't know, and Dr. Troy said that's why children die. People don't know. He said if Malachy or I showed the slightest sign of a cough, or the faintest rattle in the throat, we were to be brought to him no matter what time of day or night. We were to be kept dry at all times because there seemed to be a bit of a weakness in the chest in this family. He told Mam he was very sorry for her troubles, and he'd give her a prescription for something to ease the pain of the days to come. He said God was asking too much, too damn much. Grandma came over to our room with Aunt Aggie. She washed Eugene, and Aunt Aggie went to shop for a little white gown and a set of rosary beads. They dressed him in a white gown and laid him on the bed by the window where he used to look out for Oliver. They placed his hands on his chest, one hand on top of the other, bound in the little white rosary beads. Grandma brushed the hair back from his eyes and forehead, and she said, "Doesn't he have lovely, soft, silky hair?" Mam went to the bed and pulled a blanket over his legs to keep him warm. Grandma and Aunt Aggie looked at each other and said nothing. Dad stood at the end of the bed, beating his fist against his thighs, talking to Eugene, telling him, "Och, it was the River Shannon that harmed you, the dampness from that river that came and took you and Oliver." Grandma said, "Will you stop that? You're making the whole house nervous." She took Dr. Troy's prescription and told me to run over to O'Connell the chemist for the pills, that there would be no charge due to the kindness of Dr. Troy. Dad said he'd come with me, that we go to the Jesuit church and say a prayer for Margaret and Oliver and Eugene, all happy in heaven. The chemist gave us the pills. We stopped to say the prayers, and when we returned to the room, Grandma gave Dad the money to bring a few bottles of stout from the pub. Mam said, "No, no," but Grandma said, "He doesn't have the pills to ease him, God help us, and a bottle of stout will be some small comfort." Then she told him he'd have to go to the undertaker tomorrow to bring the coffin back in the carriage. She told me go with my father and make sure he didn't stay in the pub all night and drink all the money. Dad said, "Ach, Frankie shouldn't be in pubs." And she said, "Then don't stay there." He put on his cap, and we went to South's pub, and he told me at the door I could go home now, that he'd be home after 1 pint. I said, "No," and he said, "Don't be disobedient, go home to your poor mother." And I said, "No," and he said I was a bad boy, and God would be displeased. I said I wasn't going home without him, and he said, "Ach, what is the world coming to?" He had 1 quick pint of porter in the pub, and we went home with the bottles of stout. Pat Keating was in our room, with a small bottle of whiskey and bottles of stout, and Uncle Pat Sheehan brought 2 bottles of stout for himself. Uncle Pat sat on the floor, with his arms around his bottles, and he kept saying, they're mine," for fear they'd be taken from him. People who were dropped on their heads always worry someone will steal their stout. Grandma said, "All right, Pat, drink your stout yourself. No one will bother you." She and Aunt Aggie sat on the bed by Eugene. Pat Keating sat at the kitchen table, drinking his stout and offering everyone a sip of his whiskey. Mam took her pills and sat by the fire with Malachy in her lap. She kept saying Malachy had hair like Eugene, and Aunt Aggie said no, he did not, till Grandma drove her elbow into Aunt Aggie's chest and told her, "Shut up." Dad stood against the wall, drinking his stout between the fireplace and the bed with Eugene. Pat Keating told stories, and the big people laughed, even though they didn't want to laugh, or they weren't supposed to laugh in the presence of a dead child. He said when he was in the English army in France, the Germans sent gas over, which made him so sick they had to take him to the hospital. They kept him in the hospital a while and then sent him back to the trenches. English soldiers were sent home, but they didn't give a fiddler's fart about the Irish soldiers, whether they lived or died. Instead of dying, Pa made a vast fortune. He said he solved one of the great problems of trench warfare. In the trenches, it was so wet and muddy, they had no way of boiling the water for the tea. He said to himself, Jesus, I have all this gas in my system, and 'tis a great pity to waste it. So, he shoved the pipe up his arse, lit a match to it, and there in a second he had a fine flame ready to boil water in any billy can. Tommies came running from trenches all around when they heard the news, and they gave him any amount of money if he'd let them boil water. He made so much money he was able to bribe the generals to let him out of the army, and off he went to Paris, where he had a fine time drinking wine with artists and models. He had such a high time of it, he spent all his money. When he came back to Limerick, the only job he could get was in the gas works, shoveling coal into the furnaces. He said there was so much gas in his system now, he could supply light to a small town for a year. Aunt Aggie sniffed and said that was not a proper story to be telling in the presence of a dead child, and Grandma said it was better to have a story like that than to be sitting around with a long face. Uncle Pat Sheehan, sitting on the floor with his stout, said he was going to sing a song. More power to you, said Pat Keating, and Uncle Pat sang The Road to Rasheen. He kept saying, Rasheen, Rasheen, mo vornin mean, and the song made no sense because his father dropped him on his head long ago, and every time he sang that song he had different words. Grandma said that was a fine song, and Pat Keating said Caruso better look over his shoulder. Dad went over to the bed in the corner when he slept with Mam. He sat on the edge, put his bottle on the floor, covered his face with his hands and cried. He said, Frank, come here. And I had to go to him so that he could hug me the way Mam was hugging Malachi. Grandma said, we better go now and sleep a bit before the funeral tomorrow. They each knelt by the bed and said a prayer and kissed Eugene's forehead. Dad put me down, stood up, and nodded to them as they left. When they were gone, he lifted each of the stout bottles to his mouth and drained it. He ran his finger inside the whiskey bottle and licked it. He turned down the flame of the paraffin oil lamp on the table and said it was time for Malachi and me to be in bed. We'd have to sleep with him and Mam that night, as little Eugene would be needing the bed for himself. It was dark in the room now, except for the sliver of streetlight that fell on Eugene's lovely, soft, silky hair. Dad lights the fire in the morning, makes the tea, toasts the bread in the fire. He brings Mam's toast and tea, but she waves it away and turns to the wall. He brings Malachi and me to Eugene, to kneel and say a prayer. He says the prayers of one child are worth more in heaven than the prayers of 10 cardinals and 40 bishops. He shows us how to bless ourselves. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, Amen. And he says, Dear God, this is what you want, isn't it? You want my son Eugene? You took his brother Oliver? You took his sister Margaret? I'm not supposed to question that, am I? Dear God above, I don't know why children have to die, but that is your will. You told the river to kill, and the Shannon killed. Could you at last be merciful? Could you leave us the children we have? That is all we ask. Amen. He helps Malachi and me wash our heads and feet, so that we'll be clean for Eugene's funeral. We have to be very quiet, even when he hurts us cleaning our ears with the corner of the towel we brought from America. We have to be quiet, because Eugene is there with his eyes closed, and we don't want him to be waking up and looking out the window for Oliver. Grandma comes and tells Mam she has to get up. There are children dead, she says, but there are children alive and they need their mother. She brings Mam a little tea in a mug to wash down the pills that ease the pain. Dad tells Grandma it's Thursday and he has to go to the labour exchange for the dole, and then down to the undertaker to bring the mourning carriage and the coffin. Grandma tells him, take me with him, but he says it's better for me to stay with Malachi so that I can pray for my little brother dead in the bed. Grandma says, is it codding me you are? Pray for a little child that's barely 2 and already playing with his little brother in heaven? You'll take your son with you, and he'll remind you this is no day for the pubs. She looks at him, and he looks at her, and he puts on his cap. At the labour exchange, we stand at the end of the queue, till a man comes from behind the counter and tells Dad he's very sorry for his troubles, and he should go ahead of everyone else on this sorrowful day. Men touch their caps and say they're sorry for his troubles, and sub-pat my head and give me pennies, 24 pennies, 2 shillings. Dad tells me I'm rich now, and I should buy myself a suite, while he goes into this place for a minute. I know this place is a pub, and I know he wants to get the black stuff that is called the pint, but I don't say anything, because I want to go to the shop next door for a piece of toffee. I chew my toffee till it melts and leaves my mouth all sweet and sticky. Dad is still in the pub, and I wonder if I should get another piece of toffee as long as he's in there with the pint. I'm about to give the money to the woman in the shop when my hand is slapped down, and there's Aunt Aggie raging. "Is this what you do," she says, "on the day of your brother's funeral, gorging yourself on sweets? And where's that father of yours?" He's in the pub." "Of course he's in the pub. You out here stuffing yourself with sweets, and him in there getting himself into a staggering condition the day your poor little brother goes to the graveyard." She tells the shopwoman, just like his father, the same odd manner, the same old northern jaw. She tells me get into that pub and tell my father to stop the drinking and get the coffin in the carriage. She will not set foot inside the pub, for the drink is the curse of this poor, God-forsaken country. Dad is sitting at the back of the pub with a man who has a dirty face and hair growing out of his nose. They're not talking, but staring straight ahead, and their black pints are resting on a small white coffin on the seat between them. I know that's Eugene's coffin because Oliver had one like it, and I want to cry when I see the black pints on top of it. I'm sorry now I ever ate that toffee, and I wish I could take it out of my stomach and give it back to the woman in the shop, because it's not right to be eating toffee when Eugene is dead in the bed, and I'm frightened by the two black pints on his white coffin. The man with Dad is saying, "No, mister, you can't leave a child's coffin in a carriage no more. I did that once, went in for a pint, and they robbed that little coffin out of the bloody carriage. Can you credit that? It was empty, thank God, but there you are. Desperate times we live in, desperate." The man with Dad lifts his pint and takes a long swallow, and when he puts his glass down, there's a hollow sound in the coffin. Dad nods at me. "We'll be going in a minute, son." But when he goes to put his glass on the coffin after the long swallow, I push it away. "That's Eugene's coffin. I'll tell Ma'am you put your glass on Eugene's coffin." Now, son, now, son." "Dad, that's Eugene's coffin." The other man says, "Will we have another pint, mister?" Dad says to me, "Wait outside another few minutes, Francis." "No." "Don't be a bad boy." "No." The other man says, "By Jesus, if that was my son, I'd kick his arse from here to the County Kerry. He have no right to be talking to his father in that manner on a sorrowful day. If a man can't have a pint the day of a funeral, what's the use of living at all, at all?" Dad says, "All right, we'll go." They finish their pints and wipe the wet brown stains off the coffin with their sleeves. The man climbs up to the driver's seat of the carriage, and Dad and I ride inside. He has the coffin on his lap, and he presses it against his chest. At home, our room is filled with big people: Ma'am, Grandma, Aunt Aggie, her husband Pat Keating, Uncle Pat Sheehan, Uncle Tom Sheehan, who's Ma'am's oldest brother, and who never came near us before because he hates people from the north of Ireland. Uncle Tom has his wife, Jane, with him. She's from Galway, and the people say she has the look of a Spaniard, and that's why no one in the family talks to her. The man takes the coffin from Dad, and when he brings it into the room, Ma'am moans, "Oh no, oh God, no." The man tells Grandma he'll be back in a while to take us to the graveyard. Grandma tells him he'd better not come back to this house in a drunken state, because this child that's gone to the graveyard suffered greatly and deserves a bit of dignity, and she won't put up with a driver that's drunk and ready to fall out of the high seat. The man says, "Missus, I drove dozens of children to the graveyard, and never once fell out of any seat, high or low." The men are drinking stout from bottles again, and the women are sipping sherry from jam jars. Uncle Pat Sheehan tells everyone, "This is my stout, this is my stout." And Grandma said, "'Tis all right, Pat, no one will take your stout." Then he says he wants to sing The Road to Rasheen. So Pat Keating says, "No, Pat, you can't sing on the day of a funeral. You could sing the night before." But Uncle Pat keeps saying, "This is my stout, and I want to sing The Road to Rasheen." And everyone knows he talks like that because he was dropped in his head. He starts to sing his song, but stops when Grandma takes the lid off the coffin, and Ma'am sobs, oh, Jesus, will it ever stop? Will I be left with one child?" Ma'am is sitting on a chair at the head of the bed. She's stroking Eugene's hair and face and hands. She tells him that of all the children in the world, he was the sweetest and the most delicate and loving. She tells him 'tis a terrible thing to lose him, but isn't he in heaven now with his brother and his sister? And isn't that a comfort to us, knowing Oliver is no longer lonesome for his twin? Still, she puts her head down next to Eugene and cries so hard all the women in the room cry with her. She cries till Pat Keating tells her we have to go before the darkness falls, that we can't be in graveyards in the dark. Grandma whispers to Aunt Aggie, "Who'll put the child in the coffin?" And Aunt Aggie whispers, "I won't. That's the job for the mother." Uncle Pat hears them. "I'll put the child in the coffin," he says. He limps to the bed and places his arms around Mam's shoulders. She looks up at him and her face is drenched. He says, "I'll put the child in the coffin, Angela." "Oh, Pat," she says. "Pat." "I can do it," he says. "Sure, he's only a small child, and I never lifted a small child before in me life. I never had a small child in my arms. I won't drop him, Angela. I won't. Honest to God, I won't." "I know you won't, Pat. I know you won't." "I'll lift him, and I won't be singing the Road to Rasheen." "I know you won't, Pat," Mam says. Pat pulls down the blanket Mam put there to keep Eugene warm. Eugene's feet are white and bright with little blue veins. Pat bends over, picks up Eugene and holds him against his chest. He kisses Eugene's forehead, and then everyone in the room kisses Eugene. He places Eugene in the coffin and steps back. We're all gathered around, looking at Eugene for the last time. Uncle Pat says, "See, I didn't drop him, Angela." And she touches his face. Aunt Aggie goes to the pub for the driver. He puts the lid on the coffin and screws it down. He says, "Who's coming in the carriage?" and takes the coffin to the carriage. There's room only for Mam and Dad, Malachy and me. Grandma says, "Ye go ahead to the graveyard and we'll wait here." I don't know why we can't keep Eugene. I don't know why they have to send him away with that man who puts his pint in the white coffin. I don't know why they had to send Margaret away, and Oliver. It's a bad thing to put my sister and my brothers in a box, and I wish I could say something to someone. The horse clopped through the streets of Limerick. Malachy said, "Are we going to see Oliver?" And Dad said, "No, Oliver is in heaven, and don't ask me what heaven is because I don't know." Mam said, "Heaven is a place where Oliver and Eugene and Margaret are happy and warm, and we see them there someday." Malachy said, "The horse did his doo-doo on the street, and there was a smell." And Mam and Dad had to smile. At the graveyard, the driver climbs down and opens the door of the carriage. "Give me that coffin," he says, "and I'll carry it up to the grave." He yanks at the coffin and stumbles. Mam says, "You're not carrying my child in the condition you're in." She turns to Dad. "You carry him," she says. "Do what you like," says the driver. "Do what you bloody well like," and he climbs up to his seat. It's getting dark now, and the coffin seems whiter than ever in Dad's arms. Mam takes our hands, and we follow Dad through the graves. The jackdaws are quiet in the trees, because their day is nearly over, and they have to rest so they can get up early in the morning and feed their babies. Two men with shovels are waiting by a small open grave. One man says, "You're very late. Good thing this is a small job or we'd be gone." He climbs into the grave. "Hand it to me," he says, and Dad hands him the coffin. The man sprinkles some straw and grass on the coffin, and as he climbs out, the other man shovels in the earth. Mam lets out a long cry, "Oh, Jesus, Jesus," and a jackdaw croaks in a tree. I wish I had a rock to hit that jackdaw. When the men finish shoveling in the earth, they wipe their foreheads and wait. One says, "Ah, well, now, there's usually a little something for the thirst that's in it." Dad says, "Oh, yes, yes," and gives them money. They say, "Sorry for your troubles," and they leave. We make our way back to the carriage at the graveyard gate, but the carriage is gone. Dad looks around in the darkness and comes back shaking his head. Mam says, "That driver is nothing but a dirty old drunkard. God forgive me." It's a long walk from the graveyard to our room. Mam tells Dad, "These children need some nourishment, and you have money left from the dole this morning. If you're thinking of going to the pubs tonight, you can forget it. We're taking them to Knockton's, and they can have fish and chips and lemonade, for it isn't every day they bury a brother." The fish and chips are delicious with vinegar and salt, and the lemonade is tart in our throats. When we get home, the room is empty. There are empty stout bottles on the table, and the fire is out. Dad lights the paraffin oil lamp, and you can see the hollow left in the pillow by Eugene's head. You expect to hear him and see him toddling across the room, climbing up in the bed to look out the window for Oliver. Dad tells Mam he's going for a walk. She says, "No." She knows what he's up to, that he can't wait to spend his last few shillings in the pub. "All right," he says. He lights the fire, and Mam makes tea, and soon we're in bed. Malachy and I are back in the bed where Eugene died. I hope he's not cold in that white coffin in the graveyard, though I know he's not there anymore because angels come to the graveyard and open the coffin and he's far from the Shannon dampness that kills, up in the sky in heaven with Oliver and Margaret, where they have plenty of fish and chips and toffee, and no aunts to bother you, where all the fathers bring home the money from the labour exchange, and you don't have to be running around to pubs to find them. Mam says she can't spend another minute in that room in Hartstone Street. She sees Eugene morning, noon and night. She sees him climbing the bed to look out at the street for Oliver, and sometimes she sees Oliver outside and Eugene inside, the two of them chatting away. She's happy they're chatting like that, but she doesn't want to be seeing and hearing them the rest of her life. It's a shame to move when we're so near Leamy's National School, but if she doesn't move soon, she'll go out of her mind and wind up in the lunatic asylum. We moved to Roden Lane, on top of a place called Barrick Hill. There are 6 houses on one side of the lane, one on the opposite side. The houses are called 2 up, 2 down. 2 rooms on top, 2 on the bottom. Our house is at the end of the lane, the last of the 6. Next to our door is a small shed, a lavatory, and next to that, a stable. Mam goes to the St. Vincent de Paul Society to see if there's any chance of getting furniture. The man says he'll give us a docket for a table, 2 chairs and 2 beds. He says we'll have to go to a second-hand furniture shop down in the Irish town and haul the furniture home ourselves. Mam says we can use the pram she had for the twins, and when she says that, she cries. She wipes her eyes on her sleeves and asks the man if the beds were getting her second-hand. He says of course they are. And she says she's worried about sleeping in beds someone might have died in, especially if they had the consumption. The man says, I'm very sorry, but beggars can't be choosers. It takes us all day to haul the furniture on the pram from one end of Limerick to the other. There are 4 wheels in the pram, but one is buckety. It wants to go in a different direction. We have 2 beds, 1 sideboard with a mirror, a table, and 2 chairs. We're happy with the house. We can walk from room to room and up and down the stairs. You feel very rich when you can go up and down the stairs all day as much as you please. Dad lights the fire and Mam makes the tea. He sits at the table on one chair, she sits on the other, and Maliki and I sit on the trunk we brought from America. While we're drinking our tea, an old man passes our door with a bucket in his hand. He empties the bucket into the lavatory and flushes, and there's a powerful stink in our kitchen. Mam goes to the door and says, Why are you emptying your bucket in our lavatory? He raises his cap to her. Your lavatory, Mrs. Ah, no. You're making a bit of a mistake there, ha. This is not your lavatory. Sure, isn't this the lavatory for the whole lane? You'll see passing your door here the buckets of 11 families, and I can tell you it gets very powerful here in the warm weather. Very powerful altogether. 'Tis December now, thank God, with a chill in the air and Christmas around the corner, and the lavatory isn't that bad, but the day will come when you'll be calling for a gas mask. So good night to you, missus, and I hope you'll be happy in your house. Mam says, Wait a minute, sir. Could you tell me who cleans this lavatory? Cleans? Ah, Jesus, that's a good one. Cleans, she says. Is it joking you are? These houses were built in the time of Queen Victoria herself, and if this lavatory was ever cleaned, it must have been done by someone in the middle of the night when no one was looking. And he shuffles up the lane, laughing away to himself. Mam comes back to her chair and her tea. We can't stay here, she says. That lavatory will kill us all with diseases. Dad says, we can't move again. Where will we get a house for 6 shillings a week? We'll keep the lavatory clean ourselves. We'll boil buckets of water and throw them in there. Oh, will we, says Mam. And where will we get the coal or turf or blocks to be boiling water? Dad says nothing. He finishes his tea and looks for a nail to hang on one picture. The man in the picture has a thin face. He wears a yellow skull cap and a black robe with a cross on his chest. Dad says he was a pope, Leo XIII, a great friend of the working man. He brought this picture all the way from America, where he found it thrown out by someone who had no time for the working man. Mam says he's talking a lot of bloody nonsense, and he says she shouldn't say bloody in front of the children. Dad finds a nail, but wonders how he's going to get it into the wall without a hammer. Mam says he could go borrow one from the people next door, but he says you don't go around borrowing from people you don't know. He leans the picture against the wall and drives the nail with the bottom of a jam jar. The jam jar breaks and cuts his hand, and a blob of blood falls on the Pope's head. He wraps his hand in a dish rag and tells Mam, quick, quick, wipe the blood off the Pope before it dries. She tries to wipe the blood away with her sleeve, but it's wool and spreads the blood to the whole side of the Pope's face is smeared. Dad says, Lord above, Angela, you've destroyed the Pope entirely. And she says, Alice, stop your whining. We'll get some paint to go over his face someday. And Dad says, he's the only Pope that was ever a friend to the working man. And what are we to say if someone from the St. Vincent de Paul Society comes in and sees blood all over him? Mam says, I don't know. It's your blood. It is a sad thing when a man can't even drive a nail straight. It just goes to show how useless you are. You'd be better off digging fields, and anyway, I don't care. I have a pain in me back, and I'm going to bed. Ach, what am I going to do? Dad says. Take down the Pope and hide him in the coal hole under the stairs where he won't be seen, and he'll be out of harm's way. I can't, says Dad. It would be bad luck. Coal hole is no place for a Pope. When the Pope is up, he's up. Suit yourself, says Mam. I will, says Dad. This is our first Christmas in Limerick, and the girls are out in the lane, skipping rope and singing. Christmas is coming and the goose is getting fat. Please put the penny in the old man's hat. If you haven't a penny, a halfpenny will do, and if you haven't a halfpenny, God bless you. Boys tease the girls and call out, May your mother have an accident abroad in the loo. Mam says she'd like to have a nice Christmas dinner. But what can you do when the Labour Exchange reduces the dole to 16 shillings after Oliver and Eugene died? You pay the rent of 6 shillings, you have 10 shillings left, and what use is that to 4 people? Dad can't get any work. He gets up early on weekdays, lights the fire, boils water for the tea, and his shaving mug. He puts on a shirt and attaches a collar with studs. He puts on his tie and his cap, and goes to the Labour Exchange to sign for the dole. He will never leave the house without collar and tie. A man without collar and tie is a man with no respect for himself. You never know when the clerk at the Labour Exchange might tell you there's a job going at Rang's Flour Mills or the Limerick Cement Company. And even if it's a labouring job, what will they think of you if you appear without collar and tie? Bosses and foremen always show him respect and say they're ready to hire him, but when he opens his mouth and they hear the North of Ireland accent, they take a Limerick man instead. That's what he tells Mam by the fire. And when she says, Why don't you dress like a proper working man? He says he'll never give an inch, never let them know. And when she says, Why can't you try to talk like a Limerick man? He says he'll never sink that low. And the greatest sorrow of his life is that his sons are now afflicted with the Limerick accent. She says, Sorry for your troubles, and I hope that's all you'll ever have. And he says that someday, with God's help, we'll get out of Limerick and far from the Shannon that kills. I asked Dad what afflicted means, and he says, Sickness, son, and things that don't fit. When he's not looking for work, Dad goes for long walks, miles into the country. He asks farmers if they need any help, that he grew up on a farm and can do anything. If they hire him, he goes to work right away with his cap on and his collar and tie. He works so hard and long, the farmers have to tell him to stop. They wonder how a man can work through a long, hot day with no thought of food or drink. Dad smiles. He never brings home the money he earns on farms. That money seems to be different from the dole, which is supposed to be brought home. He takes the farm money to the pub and drinks it. If he's not home when the Angelus rings at 6 o'clock, Mam knows he had a day of work. She hopes he might think of his family and pass the pub even once, but he never does. She hopes he might bring home something from the farm, potatoes, cabbage, turnips, carrots, but he'll never bring home anything because he'd never stoop so low as to ask a farmer for anything. Mam says 'tis all right for her to be begging at the St. Vincent de Paul Society for a docket for food, but he can't stick a few spuds in his pocket. He says it's different for a man. You have to keep the dignity. Wear your collar and tie, keep up the appearance, and never ask for anything. Mam says, I hope it keeps fine for you. When the farm money is gone, he rolls home singing and crying over Ireland and his dead children, mostly about Ireland. If he sings Roddy McCauley, it means he had only the price of a pint or two. If he sings Kevin Barry, it means he had a good day, that he is now falling down drunk and ready to get us out of bed, line us up, and make us promise to die for Ireland, unless Mam tells him leave us alone or she'll brain him with the poker. Ah, you wouldn't do that, Angela. I would, and more. You better stop the nonsense and go to bed. Bed, bed, bed. What's the use of going to bed? If I go to bed, I'll only have to get up again, and I can't sleep in a place where there's a river sending poison to us and mist and fog. He goes to bed, pounds the wall with his fist, sings a woeful song, falls asleep. He's up at daylight, because no one should sleep beyond the dawn. He wakes Malachi and me, and we're tired from being kept up the night before with his talking and singing. We complain and say we're sick, we're tired. But he pulls back the overcoats that cover us and forces us out on the floor. It's December and it's freezing, and we can see our breath. We pee into the bucket by the bedroom door and run downstairs for the warmth of the fire Dad has already started. We wash our faces and hands in a basin that sits under the water tap by the door. The pipe that leads to the tap has to be held to the wall by a piece of twine looped around a nail. Everything around the tap is damp, the floor, the wall, the chair the basin sits on. The water from the tap is icy, and our fingers turn numb. Dad says, "This is good for us. It will make men of us." He throws the icy water on his face and neck and chest to show there's nothing to fear. We hold our hands to the fire for the heat that's in it, but we can't stay there long because we have to drink our tea and eat our bread and go to school. Dad makes us say grace before meals and grace after meals, and he tells us, be good boys at school because God is watching every move, and the slightest disobedience will send us straight to hell, where we'll never have to worry about the cold again. And he smiles. 2 weeks before Christmas, Maliki and I come home from school in a heavy rain, and when we push in the door, we find the kitchen empty. The table and chairs and trunk are gone, and the fire is dead in the grate. The Pope is still there. That means we haven't moved again. Dad would never move without the Pope. The kitchen floor is wet, little pools of water all around, and the walls are twinkling with the damp. There's a noise upstairs, and when we go up, we find Dad and Mam and the missing furniture. It's nice and warm there with the fire blazing in the grate, Mam sitting in the bed, and Dad reading the Irish press and smoking a cigarette by the fire. Mam tells us there was a terrible flood, that the rain came down the lane and poured in under our door. They tried to stop it with rags, but they only turned sopping wet and let the rain in. People emptying their buckets made it worse, and there was a sickening stink in the kitchen. She thinks we should stay upstairs as long as there's rain. We'll be warm through the winter months, and then we can go downstairs in the springtime if there's any sign of a dryness in the walls or the floor. Dad says it's like going away on our holidays to a warm, foreign place like Italy. That's what we call the upstairs from now on, Italy. Maliki says the Pope is still on the wall downstairs, and he's going to be all cold, and couldn't we bring him up? But Mam says, no, he's going to stay where he is because I don't want him on the wall glaring at me in the bed. Isn't it enough that we dragged him all the way from Brooklyn to Belfast to Dublin to Limerick? All I want now is a little peace, ease, and comfort. Mam takes Maliki and me to the St. Vincent de Paul Society to stand in the queue and see if there's any chance of getting something for the Christmas dinner, a goose or a ham. But the man says everyone in Limerick is desperate this Christmas. He gives her a docket for groceries at McGrath's shop and another one for the butcher. No goose, says the butcher, no ham. No fancy item when you bring the docket from the St. Vincent de Paul. What you can have now, missus, is black pudding and tripe, or a sheep's head, or a nice pig's head. No harm in a pig's head, missus, plenty of meat, and the children love it. Slice that cheek, slather it with mustard, and you're in heaven. Though, I suppose they wouldn't have the likes of that in America, where they're mad for the steak, and all classes of poultry flying, walking, or swimming itself. He tells Mam, no, she can't have boiled bacon or sausages, and if she has any sense, she'll take the pig's head before they're all gone the way the poor people of Limerick are clamouring for them. Mam says the pig's head isn't right for Christmas, and he says 'tis more than the Holy Family had in that cold stable in Bethlehem long ago. You wouldn't find them complaining if someone offered them a nice fat pig's head. No, they wouldn't complain, says Mam, but they'd never eat the pig's head. They were Jewish. And what does that have to do with it? A pig's head is a pig's head. And a Jew is a Jew, and 'tis against their religion, and I don't blame them. The butcher says, are you a bit of an expert, missus, on the Jews and the pig? I am not, says Mam, but there was a Jewish woman, Mrs. Leibowitz, in New York, and I don't know what we would have done without her. The butcher takes the pig's head off his shelf, and when Maliki says, ooh, ooh, look at the dead dog, the butcher and Mam burst out laughing. He wraps the head in a newspaper, hands it to Mam, and says, Happy Christmas. Then he wraps up some sausages and tells her, take these sausages for your breakfast on Christmas Day. Mam says, oh, I can't afford sausages. And he says, am I asking you for money? Am I? Take these sausages. They might help make up for the lack of a goose or a ham. Sure, you don't have to do that, says Mam. I know that, missus. If I had to do it, I wouldn't. Mam says she has a pain in her back, that I'll have to carry the pig's head. I hold it against my chest, but it's damp, and when the newspaper begins to fall away, everyone can see the head. Mam says, I'm ashamed in me life that the world should know we're having pig's head for Christmas. Boys from Leamy's National School see me, and they point and laugh. Oh, God, look at Frankie McCourt and his pig snout. Is that what the Yanks ate for Christmas dinner, Frankie? One calls to another. Hey, Christy, do you know how to eat a pig's head? No, I don't, Paddy. Grab him by the ears and chew the face off of him. And Christy says, hi, Paddy, do you know the only part of the pig the McCourts don't eat? No, I don't, Christy. The only part they don't eat is the oink. After a few streets, the newspaper is gone altogether, and everyone can see the pig's head. His nose is flat against my chest and pointing up in my chin, and I feel sorry for him because he's dead and the world is laughing at him. My sister and 2 brothers are dead too. But if anyone laughed at them, I'd hit them with a rock. I wish Dad would come and help us because Mam has to stop every few steps and lean against the wall. She's holding her back and telling us she'll never be able to climb Barrack Hill. Even if Dad came, he wouldn't be much use because he never carries anything, parcels, bags, packages. If you carry such things, you lose your dignity. That's what he says. He carried the twins when they were tired, and he carried the Pope. But that was not the same as carrying ordinary things like a pig's head. He tells Maliki and me that when you grow up, you have to wear a collar and